Jennifer walked on, brushing away her tears. The pouring rain helped hide the pain across her cheeks. Life seemed to be over, cut short forever after hearing those words. That was less than an hour ago. On the second floor of his house. "I'm not marrying you. Go get an abortion," her lover said in a cold tone in response to her confession. Jennifer was not confused. "You said we were serious. We're dating." "Yes, dating to have a good time, Jennifer. What were you thinking? Why did you believe I was going to propose to you to be my wife when you asked that? You always take a guy's word at face value," he asked with a chuckle. "What am I supposed to do now?" "Do you think I should have an abortion?" The girl broke off, looking into the insolent eyes of her beloved John. "I told you to get rid of it. I'll give you the money. Do you realize that after the abortion I may never have children at all? What are you reproaching me with? Children are the responsibility of the one who gives birth to them. I don't owe you anything." Jennifer looked in horror at the guy she had fallen in love with and said through her tears, "I don't recognize you, John. What are you talking about? It was your offer to go to the drugstore to get pills. What does that have to do with me? I'm the one who has to give birth, not you. Why did you think for me instead of letting me make the decision myself?" That made her cry even harder. John pulled out his smartphone, not reacting to her tears, and started to look at something. After a minute, she heard a notification on her phone. "I transferred the money. You can go to the best clinic. You've had enough. You'll still have some left over," he said idly. "Then don't you feel sorry for this child at all? It's a human being, John. A tiny human being. It's an embryo now." "Don't be dramatic." Jennifer couldn't believe it when she heard those words. Her heart froze. Her gaze became glassy. She lifted her eyes and looked at her face, realizing she was looking for a conscience from an unconscience, and said, "I wish your mother had done the same to you," wiping away her tears. The last words came out of her like a lump of stinking mud. Jennifer rushed away from John's house, from the shards of her broken heart left in his house. Outside, the fall rain was pouring down. There was no umbrella, but that was even better. No one would guess she was crying. The memory took her back to their acquaintance in the hot summer. A friend had invited her to a picnic where Jennifer had met John, a tall, slender guy. He looked at her with his small black eyes. His gaze gave her uncomfortable goosebumps all over her body. There was no way she would have tried to get close to him, but her friend had noticed that he was interested and had persuaded her to talk to him. John turned out to be extremely kind and polite. After the picnic, he called a personal driver to take Jennifer home. Only then did she learn that he was the son of the owners of the local knitting factory. Everyone in town knew about this enterprise. They paid good wages, paid generous overtime, and gave extra days off. It was the dream of every third citizen to get a job with this company. Even the janitors were paid twice as much as anywhere else. Jennifer's mom worked in this factory, as did many others. Jennifer froze at the intercom, hesitant to pick up the key. Her mother knew about her relationship with John and had disapproved of it from the beginning, warning, "The son of the rich is a go-getter. He can't be trusted." With a trembling hand, Jennifer opened the entryway door, pressed the elevator call button. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Her mother wouldn't be happy about the surprise. But there was nowhere to go. Father was dead. Grandmother might have a heart attack from such news. In despair, Jennifer burst into tears again. The elevator doors opened. In the elevator mirror, she saw her crying face and smeared mascara. She had forgotten all about makeup. Taking tissues from her purse, Jennifer quickly cleaned herself up. Otherwise, her mother would ask what was wrong. The two-room apartment smelled pleasantly of borscht. "Jennifer, hi. You're home early today, aren't you?" "I parked. Mom's in the kitchen. We broke up. I heard my mother throw a spoon into the plate over the noise in the hallway." "What happened? Tell me," Sharon asked in a caring voice, looking at her daughter. Unable to hold back any longer, Jennifer burst into tears. "The bastard," her mother shouted after hearing her. "He's not going to get away with this." No. Jennifer looked sadly at the flaring mom and said, "What can he do? You can't make him fall in love and get married. You can make him take care of the baby, though. All you have to do is sue for paternity, and that bastard will be in trouble." "So the baby hasn't been born yet," said the mother. "It will be. And that bastard isn't going anywhere. I'm not going to let you, a first-year student, be left with a baby in your arms. I'll go to his parents tomorrow and tell them everything. Let them influence their son," the mother said, and suggested, "Let's go to the kitchen, eat." "Did you register with the gynecologist?" "Yes, good for you." Mom hugged her and kissed her on the cheek. "Don't worry. I won't let you get hurt, no matter what it costs me. I'm going to look for a job tomorrow so I can get some maternity pay. You can hardly support me and the baby on your own. That's my gold. Find one if you can. Without education, without experience, It's a bit difficult, but we could really use an extra penny. Her mother couldn't sleep at night, imagining going to talk to John's family tomorrow. It would be difficult for her, a simple cleaning woman, to threaten these powerful and wealthy people, who were also her superiors. Will they listen to her? What will she live on if she is fired for this conversation? She has a stash, of course, but it won't last long. In the morning, she woke up earlier than usual and peeked into Jennifer's room. Her daughter was still asleep, filled with determination to protect her and her future grandson or granddaughter. She put on her business suit, put on her makeup, styled her short hair, and, after eating a light breakfast, went to the bus stop. Her intuition told her that rotten apples grew on a sick apple tree. It was unlikely that John's parents, who had known about their son's pranks for years, would be better in character than he was. After all, the city has long been rumored how one of the girls of this infantile guy went to abortion, until he earned himself because of it infertility. The boss's office was on the second floor of the textile factory. The last time she saw John's father was on March 8th, when he handed the female employees envelopes with gift certificates to a cosmetics and perfumes man. His wife, Catherine, was the plant's chief accountant. Rumor had it that she was the reason the company was thriving. She decided that a woman's understanding of feelings would be easier than a man's. She addressed Catherine. "Catherine, good morning. My name is Sharon. I would like to speak with you regarding your son," she said as she got into the right office. "Good morning, Sharon. Have a seat." Is he distracting the young female employees from their work again? No. The question is more personal. "May I speak to you privately, mother to mother?" Hearing these words, the boss asked the other accountant to leave the office for half an hour. "This is about your son and my daughter, Jennifer. She is pregnant with his child. Your son refuses to be a father and is demanding to get rid of the child. Has he offered her an abortion? Yes, in that case. What's the problem? My daughter won't do that. It is a serious psychological and physiological trauma for a woman to give birth and raise a child alone. Would it be less traumatic for her? From your perspective, my son will not take such a step as fatherhood. He has studies, a great future. After all, marriage to your daughter is definitely not in our plans. You're willing to kill your grandson or granddaughter for your premgo. Is human life worth nothing to you at all? I've already gone for an abortion and, as you can see, I even gave birth to a son. Yes, it was a hard thing to go through, but at least next time your daughter will think with her head. You know what?" Sharon was indignant. "If you don't want to hold your son accountable, you'll be held accountable by the court's bias." There was a knock on the office door. "I'm busy," the supervisor called out, not even opening for her favorite son. "Mom, it's me," the young man uttered, looking inside and seeing his mother. "Hello, Sharon." "Come in," his mother told him. "Listen, what are you being threatened with?" John's face turned cold in an instant. "I was expecting money." "What's her problem?" "The idea of killing her own child doesn't just bother her. It bothers me too. I'm surprised you're taking it so lightly. The life of a human being born means nothing to you. As you wish, it's your right, but you'll raise it yourself. I wasn't planning on starting a family." I can imagine the headlines in the papers. "A millionaire's son marries a cleaning lady's daughter." That would be a laugh. "You don't have to get married. We'll prove your paternity in court, and then the headlines will be even more interesting." Mother and son laughed. John said, "Suppose we do, what then?" "Child support. So I'm a student. What would a quarter of my scholarship be? Less than $1. But the father's going to spend a lot of money on the DNA test. You won't always be a student. Like your mom said, you got a big future. Yeah, it's not going to be for you and your daughter. No future." John smirked victoriously, realizing that he wouldn't forgive the bastard who'd done that to her daughter. Sharon remembered the only person who could help. In a situation like this, for years she had lied that he'd been a paratrooper and died. For years she hadn't spoken to him, or even wished him happy holidays. But he was true to his word all these years, provided for her and her daughter so that they did not need anything. And inside the envelopes with money always wrote, "Remember, you and Annie at any time you can turn to me walking by." John smirked against Sharon's lips. The woman looked into his eyes and said, "Smile while you can. It's not all for naught. Lent will come." Annie's father used to run a criminal gang, and most of the town and even the surrounding villages had heard about his dealings. The gangsters took away businesses, houses, and apartments they liked. As the ringleader, Stephen did not shy away from anything. He used threats, torture, blackmail, sometimes took some families to the forest and left them there. Even the police could not defend themselves against his people. Everyone who tried to catch the gang could not be found. Within a week, the town was living in fear, until Stephen fell in love. It was just before Easter. Sharon came out of church with her mom. That's where Stephen spotted her. When he found out that the girl was religious and decent, He drove up in his BM to meet her. Sharon turned him down. "Are you crazy?" her friend shrieked when she heard what had happened. "That thug could bury all your loved ones alive just to get your consent. Don't mess with him. He's dangerous. If I don't want to meet someone, I won't," replied a stubborn Sharon. "Fool. This gang won't play games with you. Did you hear what they're doing?" A frightened Sharon heeded her friend's advice. When Stephen drove up a second time, she agreed to have dinner with him for their first date. The gang leader chose the most upscale restaurant in New York City. I didn't make a pass at her. After dinner, he gave Sharon a large bouquet of white roses and drove her home. "Good God. Did you really get mixed up with that bastard?" her mother asked anxiously when she saw whose car her daughter had emerged from with a bouquet. "I mean, the whole town is afraid of him. Why did you get mixed up with him?" "That's just it. He's a very dangerous man. And denying him an introduction was a bad idea too. I don't want to lose you or get in big trouble." "Did he hit on you?" "No. Oddly enough. Behaved decently for a thug." Rumors of Stephen and Sharon's relationship spread around town within a week. Parishioners at the church she went to, cloaked in the words of the Apostle Paul, chattered. What could righteousness have in common with lawlessness? The man provided her with a car and security. "Do you realize that your lover is risking his life to meet him?" When the gang leader showed up unexpectedly with Sharon at a morning service a month and a half later, both the congregation and the priest were frightened. From that moment on, however, Stephen's rampage was never heard of again in town. He began to develop 2 days from their business and threatened no one else. But retiring for the bandit does not mean that he will be left alone. The first time Sharon was kidnapped was right on her wedding day to Stephen. The groom's enemies snatched the bride from the house in a white dress, asking her mother to tell her future son-in-law that Sharon will be returned in pieces if he does not return the 3-bedroom apartment once taken by his gang. Stephen located the kidnappers and fed each one lead. "But couldn't you just give people their property back?" screamed at him by his rescued fiancée. "Why kill them? Because they wouldn't stop at one apartment. Believe me, darling, human greed has no limits. In this case, I'll always be kidnapped. You're okay with that?" People don't always understand the language of power quickly, but in a year, it'll be quiet. I'll provide you with heavy security for that time. After hearing those words, Sharon called off the wedding. Then Stephen himself kidnapped her and took her to a country cottage. He said that she would not return home until she changed her mind, realizing that it was better not to joke with him. Sharon agreed. 3 months into the marriage, she became pregnant. When the unborn Annie was 5 weeks old, there was another assassination attempt on her parents. After surviving the threat of miscarriage, Sharon fled from Stephen to another city, deciding that it would be safer. He provided his spouse with everything she needed through his men. Stephen realized that the family was no more when his wife, returning with a child in her arms, through the court demanded a divorce. Stephen had not expected such a turn. He had chosen a religious bride for a reason. It was known among the thugs that such a girl would be faithful, and by God's law could not divorce. However, other thugs stole future wives from Protestant churches. Apparently, unlike Stephen, they knew that the Orthodox were the most wayward. It seems that the priest who refused to marry the gang leader, even at gunpoint, understood something. Her mother told Sharon that the gang leader had bribed the judge or blackmailed him into rejecting her demands, but the spouse wouldn't do it. After the divorce proceedings, the ex approached her, gave her the keys to a 2-room apartment and said, "This is for Annie and you. I don't need your handouts. Sharon, this is not the time to show your pride. Please accept it. There is a crisis in the country. I don't want you or daughter and your mom living in a 1-bedroom. You can't provide a nanny on your own, understand?" Realizing that Stephen was right, Sharon took the keys. "Stephen, promise me something." "Sharon, what do you want?" "Stephen, promise me you won't show up in our daughter's life. Disappear as if you never existed. There's no way she's going to get her life together if everyone around her knows about her gangster daddy." "Sharon, yeah, the whole town knows I was your wife. How are you going to hide it? When I was pregnant and gave birth, we didn't live together. I'll say I got pregnant in another town by a trooper. It's safer for everyone. None of the thugs will infringe on the baby and will hopefully be left alone. Stephen, but I will still help you. The mother of my child shouldn't need anything. And if anything happens, remember, you can always turn to me." Nearly 19 years have passed since Stephen said those words. In all that time, Sharon had never once asked him for help, dealing with all the difficulties on her own. Only now. "Sharon, but you've left her no choice. The ex-spouse had accomplished a lot in the intervening years, standing in front of the 9-story building of his business center. Sharon was about to enter when a familiar heavy voice shouted behind her. Looking around, she saw a black Hummer in the parking lot. The driver's door opened and a tall, gray-haired man with bushy black eyebrows approached her. His dusky gaze was blood-chillingly terrifying. She tried to say hello to Stephen, but the words stuck in her throat. "Stephen, are you here by chance or on business?" Coming to her senses, Sharon replied, "Business. I want to ask for help for Annie. She's in trouble." Asking what was wrong, Stephen listened to her in silence and didn't seem to pay attention to Sharon's pale face. "Stephen, I'll try to help, but I can't promise anything. My wife will make a scene if she finds out I'm helping you. She doesn't know I have a daughter." "Sharon, I understand, and I'd be happy if you could come up with something. There's no one else we can count on." "Stephen, go home, don't worry. I won't let anyone treat my daughter like that." In the morning, he woke up before his alarm clock. The clock read 4. As the door to his room swung open and 2 men with guns, dressed as a SWAT team, ordered him to lie on the floor. "Jennifer," one of them asked. The boy nodded. Cuffing him, the strangers dragged him into the courtyard. "What am I being charged with?" he asked, finding himself on the lawn next to a crying mom. "You abused the daughter of a very powerful man. Now he wants to do the same to you." "John, is it true?" the mother asked in horror. "No, I have no idea who we're talking about. You have me confused with someone else." Shush. "There's no mistake, John. Just did the deed," and into the bushes stretched a man's voice. John started going through his head of all the girls he had rejected, trying to figure out which one might have such intimidating familiarity. Who had he raped? Who had he dumped? Annie Roberts. Hearing that name was the last thing he expected to hear. "Annie doesn't have a father." "He's dead," John said with bewilderment. "You're the one who's going to die now, and your mom's going to watch. She went along with killing her grandson, didn't she? So she'll survive the death of her irresponsible son?" "No, please, no," the mother screamed. Someone hit him, and he blacked out. He woke up in a windowless white room. The light of a lone bulb reflected off the light surfaces, blinding his eyes. Everything around him was white: a small toilet, a sink, doors, bedding, and a metal bed. There was no watch on his hand. "What time is it?" John asked loudly. No one answered. Instead, a slit opened at the bottom of the door and a metal tray of food appeared. "How long have I been asleep?" asked the boy again. Still no one answered him. There were no books, no newspapers, nothing around. Out of boredom, John began to walk around the room, counting his steps or minutes. He decided that the lights would be turned off for the night and waited for that moment. A long time passed. He felt sleepy, but the light bulb was still on. It was very difficult to sleep for this reason. He had to lie face down on his pillow. The food was the same all the time, and it was hard to tell what time it was. No one answered questions. John listened, but not a sound came from outside. Seeing a camera in the corner of the ceiling, he tried to feign an epileptic fit, but no one came in to check on him. Attempts to annoy the guards with his singing didn't work either. Feeling himself starting to go crazy, he wailed, "Tell me what you want, Mary Annie. I'll do anything. Just let me out of here again." There was no reply. Realizing that time flies faster in a dream, John went to sleep. He dreamed of the same white room. Opening his eyes, he saw a copy of himself in the corner wearing the same clothes with the same haircut. "This can't be," John said, not believing his eyes. Again, his copy nodded in response. From that moment on, he lost touch with reality. 4 days after the kidnapping, he was dumped unconscious outside the house, where he was discovered by a new security guard hired by his father after an armed attack on the house. Seeing that the boy was not himself, Daniel Smith brought him to a psychiatric hospital. The next day, his dad came to visit him. Upon seeing his father, John asked, "Where's Mom?" "She hasn't been found yet," Dad replied. "What do you mean they haven't found her? With your connections, you could even get her out of a space station," John said in a cold tone without raising his voice. "I know nothing will happen to her. Nothing. Thugs broke into our house, beat us up, dragged us outside in the middle of the night, and took us away. And you say nothing's going to happen. Show me the bruises from your beatings." "Were you serious?" John asked resentfully. "Absolutely. If you've been beaten, show me." The boy mewled. "That's just it. You were just dragged out. No one hit you. You don't have to exaggerate, wanting to see a smidgen of guilt on your father's stone face." John zeroed in on him with accusations. "Where were you when we were being let out like cattle? Drinking with your friends again, I suppose? Why didn't you save us with your connections?" Because there are bigger sharks in town than me, and because I don't intend to be responsible for your and Mom's decision made without me. You crossed Stephen Roberts. Do you even know who that is?" Hearing the name, John turned pale. He was the one who had shot Stephen Roberts in the legs when he refused to give him a house. "That's right. I thought Stephen had no children of his own, just a stepdaughter. Where did he get a daughter from? Certainly not from his second wife." "Second?" he wondered. "Then who was the first?" "Sharon, Annie's mom. The one you wanted. Didn't you wonder who you were sleeping with?" "Yeah, everyone said she didn't have a father, and she said so. They say they milk cows." The son began to justify himself. "I apologized to her, and the sooner the better." When Annie saw John in front of the university with a huge bouquet of roses, she was surprised and at first thought that the flowers were meant for another girl. Annie's ex called out as he watched her walk away. "Wait, what do you want?" "How mean are we?" "I just wanted to apologize. I'm sorry. I was out of line. I didn't know what I wanted and I got scared." "Let's be together, get married, like you wanted?" The girl was surprised by what she heard. "Trying to find a catch," she asked. "Why such a sudden change? You know very well." "Don't play dumb. That your family is suddenly afraid of heirs." She smirked. "More like wanted it," he said, taking Annie's hand. "Let's make up. Let's go to a restaurant." "Will you bring my mom back?" John's voice trembled. Suddenly he sat up and burst into tears. "What do you mean I'll get your mom back?" She asked with incomprehension. "Your men took her away, and not for more than a week." "What people?" "Ova, are you what?" In tears said the former, and kneeling down asked, "Please forgive me. I swear, I will take care of you. The child in my arms to carry. Just tell me, at least Mom is alive." "I don't know, honestly," she answered in a confused voice. "Stand up, please, so your mom knows. Recognize her, please. I'm begging you. I'm scared. I can't sleep well for days." "Okay, then take me home. I'll ask my mom." Wiping away her tears, John shook off his pants, ran to the car, and obligingly opened the door for Annie. "Honey," she tried to figure out when Mom had time to contact her father's friends about the unfortunate conversation with Sharon. She'd found out later that day, but there was no mention of influential acquaintances. Besides, none of her late father's relatives or buddies had ever spoken to her mother or introduced her to anyone. Only two logical explanations came to mind. Either John got something mixed up, or Mom has an acquaintance who is unknown to her. On the way, the ex suggested stopping by the store and buy a cake for tea. Well, not to appear on the doorstep of the future mother-in-law with empty hands, he smiled. "What makes you think I'll be your wife after all this?" John looked into Annie's eyes and took her hand and said, "Because you love me, or you wouldn't have kept the baby. Why would you spend your life looking at someone born to a guy you hate? So it is not his fault his daddy's an unscrupulous asshole, but it is your fault. You're the one who chose me, not me. Jennifer talked me into hanging out with you." "Did she? But when we were dating, I don't remember your friend being involved." You're right. This is my mistake." The car stopped in a parking lot outside a supermarket. "Wait here. I'll be quick," the ex said, and ran into the store. As soon as his silhouette disappeared behind the door, she came out with a bouquet of roses and said to the driver, "Fyodor, tell your boss that I went home and see him and my guests I do not wish to." "I understand you," the driver nodded with a smile. "Have a good day." "Goodbye." The entrance of the apartment building was next to the building where the store was. Running home, she shouted from the threshold, "Are you home?" "Yes, hello," came a voice from the room, reading. "Fill the vase with water, please." John gave me a big bouquet of roses. Mom looked out into the hallway and saw the bouquet and took the biggest vase in the house. "Is he trying to pay you off?" she asked her daughter. He apologized. He was on his knees, begging for forgiveness. He said my father's friends stole his mom. "So they paid. The bastards," the mother said. "Fetching water. Did you ask someone to punish them?" "Sort of." "I hope you haven't forgiven that rascal." "Not yet. I don't see any love in his words. It's all about calculation." "That's right. You don't need a husband like that, let alone a father for your child. But I chose him myself." "Mom, you're young. You don't know much about men." "No wonder she was wrong," she said, taking the bouquet. The intercom rang. "Who is it all of a sudden?" the woman wondered. "John came with me. Wants to know where his mom is." "We don't know." "You don't know where she is either?" "No. I don't give a shit about that bitch after what she did. She can die under offense. Can you check with your friends and see what they did to her? I feel sorry for him. The ringing stopped on the phone. A text from John came through on it. Mom's home. Pick up the cake. Thank you so much. How is she? John asked the doctor. Before going in to see her mother is better, but still not well. Repeats the same thing several times. Doesn't sleep well, screams at night. She was kept in a small white room in confinement. Like me, but much longer. I'm terribly sorry for your grief. I hope the perpetrators are caught and punished. We hope so, too, John lied. When he came in, Mom was sitting on her bed, mumbling to herself. Hi, the son said with embarrassment in his voice. They should pay for this, the mother said angrily, looking him straight in the eye. Who are the Robertses? Make them suffer for what they did to us. Jennifer replied and cried. John rushed to comfort his mother. She was shaking and her sobs were getting louder by the minute. Finally, she stopped and asked, Johnny, is it really you? Really, Mom? I don't think so. Her friend supported her son. Do you want to pinch for us? The mother pinched her son's ear and said, I'm happy. I thought you were dead, that you were killed. Son, I can't bear to lose you like that. It's all right, Mom. I'm here for you, he hugged her. I hope it lasts. Avenge me. Avenge me. That lousy cleaning lady should know who she's messing with. Her husband was Stephen Roberts. Did you know that? Mom was surprised. No, I thought they were just namesakes. She was his first wife. Then be careful, son. Roberts isn't someone to be trifled with, Zanaya, except she won't appreciate what her husband did. Yeah, I was at the same party as her son. I don't think he'll be happy to have a half-sister. Mom looked him in the eye and said, Tell him everything. It's unlikely that Peter wants to lose his inheritance. Meeting Stephen's stepson wasn't difficult for John. He knew where the guy spent his weekends, meeting him at a club and having a drink with him. He as if casually uttered, Why didn't you tell me you had a sister? I didn't get it. A drunken Peter wondered, what sister? Annie Roberts is my ex-girlfriend, direct heiress to father. Yeah, he doesn't have kids. I'm confused. Check his passport. And if you don't believe me, why else would he just help out some cleaning lady's daughter? How did you know they were related? I hope you didn't take my word for it, he grinned. When she said she was his daughter, I asked for her birth certificate. Little who would want to pretend to be the child of a famous businessman to hook up with me, you know, and she really is his daughter. Yeah, I'm telling you, check it out. Peter took the car and drove with him from the club to his house. The boys went up the spiral staircase to the second floor. Once in his acquaintance's room, John asked, Do you mean he keeps his passport with you? No, of course not. But I must have scans of all the pages. Once his computer crashed in his office, and Steve was making copies from the documents. That said, Peter pressed a button on the system unit, opening the right folder. The guy quickly found the necessary files and, having checked them, was stunned. On one of the pages of the passport, as a child was indeed written down as a child unknown to him, Robert's Annie. We have to show Mom, she'll kill him, Peter said. John held back his smile as best he could. Now they're fed up with her, Mom will be finished. Let's go get drunk, the acquaintance suggested with sadness in his voice. It's such a shame. Do not even imagine why I hope that after his death, all this business empire will go to me and my mother. But in the end, no way. His daughter can have half of it. Mother didn't want to marry him. John decided to ignore people's opinion of him and focus only on his wealth. Love comes and goes, but money is always wanted. Hearing these words, John was struck with the idea of taking Stephen out with his own hands. Thus he killed two birds with one stone. The news that the big businessman Roberts crashed his car into his own garage door and a neighbor's brick fence and is now in the hospital went around all the newspapers and social networks. The former candidate's enemies rejoiced. Annie's mom began to worry. Sharon and Peter took anxious calls from loved ones. John drove to his mother's house triumphantly. You know, she's dramatically on the mend today, the psychiatrist told him, smiling all day. Good appetite. Stopped talking to herself hearing this. He realized his mother already knew about his gift. As soon as the guy walked in, his mother immediately threw herself around his neck. That pervert is in a coma. Did you hear? Jennifer asked with a happy spark in her eyes. I know. Guess who accomplished that? With an enigmatic smile, her son whispered to her. You, wondered the mother. He nodded. But how? It was all his stepson, wasn't it? He got very upset when he found out about the heiress and did something to his car, smiling broadly. His mother kissed him and said, You are the best. My hope and support, my protector. Not like your father." The words made the boy glow. "Glad to try, Mom. All for you. You know that." Leaving the hospital, John called Peter. "So, celebrating, of course. You're still asking. How did Mom blame herself at first? Thought she was the reason everything happened. I told her about Stephen's daughter, showed her passport details. Mom gave him a hard time about it. He drove out of the house in a tizzy. She thought it was the argument that made him lose control of the car. Only the two of us know it was about something else." John stretched out. "Should we sit in the restaurant or the bar? It's hard to talk in a bar. Let's go to the restaurant, and thanks for the idea. Of course it would be better if a scumbag like that died right away. But a coma isn't bad either." Agreed. "Let's continue at the restaurant. I'll stop by somewhere else on the way in an hour." "Okay," the man agreed, and they said their goodbyes. John had one last burden to remove, the pregnant Annie. Driving up to the university, he called his ex. "Are you coming soon? I'm waiting for you here, right on time, as always." "I'm on my way out." When he saw Annie, he glowed, anticipating knocking the ground out from under her feet. "What are you so happy about?" she asked. "There's a reason for it, Annie. You see, I'm free again now. Have you been seeing someone?" "No, I had to marry someone who knocked me up." "Did you succeed besides me?" John laughed. "You're impenetrably stupid if you don't realize this is about you. You see, your protector, your daddy, is now in the hospital and may be asleep forever. But what are we going to do, ladies? Who else are you going to ask to scare? My father has been dead for a long time." "What do you mean? Haven't you looked at your birth certificate? Look, you might find out that your dad wasn't a paratrooper, but a gangster, for example." "I didn't have to look for the certificate. My mom confessed everything herself and apologized. So I'm the daughter of the head of the biggest business in town." "Yes, but today he had an accident. The brakes failed. It's been on the news all day. Have you heard?" John said, "I'm glad. Come on, you rascal. I want to visit your father." Annie nodded. "Go, I don't mind. You won't keep me company. I'm afraid I'll see his current spouse there. He'll ask me who I am." On the way to the hospital, Annie thought about what she would say to his family if she met them in the room. She pictured her father's grief-stricken new wife, her stepson's mother comforting him. However, there was no one near her father. With a sigh of relief, Annie examined his formidable facial features and decided to ask her mother at home about the story of their acquaintance. That night, Annie and her mother lay awake for a long time discussing Stephen over tea. "Do you think he'll make it?" she asked her mother. "Bullets didn't take him. What's an accident to him? He doesn't burn in fire or drown in water." Jennifer visited Stephen in the hospital every 3 days. She asked the doctors if there was any improvement. "He's been twiddling his thumb recently," a nurse said. In a coma, however, that didn't tell her much, except that the finger wasn't broken. In that case, what would be the sign of coming out of the coma? When he starts to regain consciousness, open his eyes, respond to sounds briefly, move gradually, cough, the nurse explained. "Coughing will be a very good sign. It will mean that breathing has been restored. You visit him often." "In these 2 weeks, no one has come but you." Annie wasn't surprised, figuring that perhaps Stephen's family had a lot of business to attend to right now. "Oh, he works hard, I guess," the nurse said. "Why, don't make me laugh. It's just that no one needs him but you." "What makes you think that?" Jennifer asked with a smile. "I've worked here for many years, and I see if a loved one is in trouble, you forget everything. People would come straight from an airplane flying across the continent, knocking on the door at night, screaming at the windows, and his wife, even though she lives in this town, didn't even find the time to come." The nurse's words made Annie think. She wanted to see a picture of her father's new wife. In a search, she found his wife's social media accounts and several posts by a grief-stricken Dana, who wrote how hard it was to see her husband in the hospital, not knowing if he would survive or not. People sympathized with her, not imagining her hypocrisy. A month and a half later, doctors suggested to Dana that Stephen be taken off life support. Upon learning of this, Annie wrote to her stepmother asking her to withhold consent. In response, Dana chimed in, "Why prolong his agony? Once he wakes up, he could be an invalid for the rest of his days. Believe me, Stephen will not forgive himself for being a burden. If that happens, I'm prepared to look after him." "For what? You're hoping to get a piece of his business?" "No, you can handle his companies just fine without me." "I don't know anything about that. You're hoping to get the assets." "I don't mean to offend you, Annie, but don't you realize that I care about him because he's my husband?" Annie laughed. "You don't know him or you wouldn't be acting like this. Stephen is a terrible man. There's a special place in hell for people like him. And nobody's a saint." Dana sighed. "Fine, sit with that half-corpse. I won't get in the way." Annie was taken aback. "What are you talking about? That's your husband." "Annie, According to the doctors, he's already got his feet in the grave. I don't get attached to someone you didn't even know. Tears came to the girl's eyes. After finishing the conversation, she cried and clung to her father's hand. You have chosen a horrible, simply monstrous wife. Please wake up or she'll kill you. Stephen's fingers stroked Annie's cheek. She lifted her head. He opened his eyes. Alive, alive. I'm so glad, she cried out. Her father smiled weakly. He seemed to recognize her. Recovering was hard, but Stephen didn't give up. He was motivated to mend his relationship with Sharon and help raise his granddaughter. Even though he lost the business, the property remained with him, thanks to a contract he had drawn up in case of illness. The contract stipulated that when death was threatened, Dan's wife became the owner of the business. But since she was unable to manage, the management passed to her son Peter. Stephen's satisfied stepson took over the business and tried to strip his stepfather of everything he had gained as much as possible. As soon as her husband came to his senses, Donna, who received everything, filed for divorce. Fortunately, such a turn of events the former gang leader expected. Gathering information about his daughter, he realized that Annie is very decent and put her on the list of directors, buying in her name a large stake in the company. When Peter wanted to change a major supplier, he was first confronted with the fact that he couldn't do it without his half-sister's vote. After receiving a threatening phone call from him, Jennifer turned to Stephen. The father told everything to his daughter and suggested how to proceed. Realizing that through her he could manage the firm, he offered Jennifer help on a permanent basis. Absolutely ignorant in this matter, the daughter naturally agreed. Not wanting to share the company with someone else, Peter threatened Jennifer with death. Stephen gave her the number of one of his friends. A few days later, the expensive car of the former stepson blew up right in the parking lot. The terrified Peter made no more threats. When Stephen started walking on his own, Annie's water broke. At the maternity hospital, it was discovered that the baby was in the wrong position. She had a C-section, the hardest day of her life, and when she woke up, when asked how the baby was, she heard that the baby was stillborn. The already trembling body had lost the will to live. To hear such a thing was a heavier burden for Annie than the word abortion. All her preparation for motherhood for many months, all her plans and hopes collapsed in an instant. Those closest to her consoled her as best they could. Her mom spent hours listening to her on the phone while she was in the hospital. Her father used his cash reserves to hire the best therapist. University friends called and wrote to be supportive. John never showed up or sent a single message. However, upon learning of the tragedy, his parents offered their condolences. His mother was the first to offer a trip to the sea at their expense. 2 days later, she was joined by his father, who paid for the little girl's funeral and said he was ready to set up a memorial at his own expense. John's family came to the funeral in full force. Even Peter showed up to sympathize, which surprised both the former stepfather and Annie herself. When the child's father put a bouquet of small toy bears on the grave of the little girl, Annie had a tantrum. Taking her daughter under her arm, the mother led her to the car. I don't understand what he wants here. He didn't pay the doctors for the delivery. He didn't try to support me in any way. Told me to get rid of the baby. And now he's hypocritically putting this bouquet with tears, Annie said. I'm far more surprised by his parents. Why all of a sudden all this spending? His mom's condolences. I don't believe it at all after everything I've heard. You think he's trying to rise in the eyes of others? Because you're a future businesswoman now, not just a cleaning lady's daughter. It could very well be. I don't believe that snake has changed. Something's up to her. I could hardly stand the wake. She went home with her parents. The surroundings were awe-inspiring, mirrors draped in black cloth. She noticed that her room was empty. Gone were the crib she had bought, the pacifiers, the clothes she had given her baby girl. The newborn photo album lying on the shelf was also gone. Seeing a crucifix in the corner of the room, Annie closed the door and knelt down and asked, Lord, I'm not a mom, and I don't know any prayers. Please give me strength. That night she had an unusual and frightening dream. She had dug up a treasure which contained a gold locket. Opening it, she saw a picture of a girl who looked just like herself. Big blue eyes, locks of pure blonde hair, a birthmark on the left side of her neck. Feeling something native in this thing, she wanted to hold it to her chest. But suddenly a silhouette in black appeared and stole the locket. Annie wanted to run after him, but her feet became stuck in the ground. Attempts to get out failed, and she failed completely. Annie found herself in hell. Seeing her, one of the devils asked, This is the treasure, here you go. At his flick, a diaper-wrapped doll appeared in the girl's hands. Seeing Annie, unable to bear the weight, fall to the ground with it, the devils laughed with the voices of her parents and snatched the doll away, whereupon she woke up. Annie decided not to date anyone else until she graduated from university. It was not easy to combine studying, running a business, and counseling with a psychotherapist, but she managed. With her parents' many activities and worries, the grief was forgotten a year later. Standing on her daughter's grave, Annie no longer cried. The next year she devoted to reading books for running a successful business and attending seminars. Her father, as before, through her, offered sensible solutions for the company, which allowed Annie to gain more and more respect in the eyes of the other directors. Except Peter, the half-brother, increasingly hated her. He's proposing to cut the staff's pay because of his mistake. Can you imagine, Dad? She was indignant on the phone as she left the business center building. He doesn't know how to take responsibility for his actions. If he does, the candy factory will close. Not all the people will work as before, getting paid $500 less. Peter doesn't think that's a significant amount of money for others. That's what I told him. Go to the factory and offer your initiative. People will appreciate it, but that's not what this is about. Dad, who's George Smith? I think he's John Smith's son, Dad replied thoughtfully. I don't remember that. He's a new face on the board of directors. He wasn't here before. I'm trying to figure out where he came from. Then he must be his son. There's only two ways to get on the board of directors, either by vote or by the agreement we made when we merged our 9 businesses. You can trust him. John was my right-hand man back in the day. I can't say anything about his son. I don't know him personally. But I trust my dad about as much as I trust you and my mom. Why? We hit it off. He invited me for coffee tomorrow. I hope he doesn't make a pass at me. If he gets naughty, let me know. I'll talk to John, and it won't happen again. After finishing her conversation with her father, Jennifer found herself in the parking lot outside the building. In front of her eyes, Peter was drinking from a tinfoil drink, leaning against his car. Don't tell me you're also driving now, she turned to him reproachfully. Where's your private driver? What's your business? It's his day off today. You can get into trouble yourself and make someone disabled if you drive drunk. But you, if you're so smart, you can teach me more life lessons. I don't get enough of your interference in the company, he said, waking up. Jesus, you're a mess. Who drives like that? Degenerates, George said, appearing over her shoulder. The new acquaintance quickly crossed the parking lot and sent Peter unconscious to the pavement with one precise blow. Jennifer covered her mouth with her hand in horror. Examining Peter's head, he said, Get the first aid kit, please. I'll call an ambulance in the meantime. Why did you hit him? To make sure he didn't go anywhere drunk. The girl brought a first aid kit from her car. Taking out sterile wipes, George explained to Annie. When I was 5 years old, my mom was hit by a drunk driver in a crosswalk. There was no way to save her. I don't want anyone else to be without a loved one like I once was. I'm sorry, I realized the police might pick him up when it was too late. It's all right. You did the drastic thing, but the right thing. Peter wouldn't have listened to what I said anyway. George and Annie got married a year after they met, and 2 years later they decided they wanted a child. And 3 years later, it turned out that the after effects of the C-section couldn't be cured, and Annie was infertile. Jennifer came home. In despair, waiting for George to return to tell him this unpleasant news, and realizing that every man wants to have an heir or heiress. Jennifer began to mentally prepare for divorce, taking out a bottle of red wine. Her husband caught her in the kitchen with a glass. There was an empty bottle on the bar and crumpled paper napkins lying on the bar, soaking up Annie's tears. Jesus, what happened? Sunshine, Alan asked, running over to hug her. George, what are you going to do if you find out I can't give you a baby? The treatment hasn't worked. With anxiety, he asked. None at all, Jennifer cried even harder. I'm infertile. I can never have children again. George kissed her on the top of her head and said, In that case, I'll offer you a choice, a surrogate mom, a baby from an orphanage, or just face your old age alone with me, whatever you want. I'll accept whatever you decide. I really will. I'll think about it. I'll tell you later what I've chosen. Annie couldn't sleep at night. She was calculating surrogate costs, risks, conditions. She paged through the database of children up for adoption. A 5-year-old blonde, sad-looking girl with big blue eyes caught her eye. Annie tried to remember where she might have seen her before. Opening the child's detailed profile, she looked at other photos. What she saw made her sit down against the computer chair, stunned. The girl had the exact same birthmark. They couldn't contain their amazement. Annie sent her mom a link to the profile, asking to see the pictures. Afterward, she woke her husband. Behind her back, Jennifer walked over to the monitor and, after reading the girl's name, asked, Annie, are you sure you want the girl you took to be named like your late daughter? Look at her neck, ignoring her husband's question, Annie asked. Taking a closer look at the picture, he said, Wow, that's quite a coincidence. And a spot like yours. It's not just a birthmark. It's like a mark on the women in our family. Me, my mom, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, we all have it. How did she get it? Do you think it's some relative of yours? I already texted my mom a link to this girl's picture. I'm curious what she'll say. What she saw surprised Annie's mother, calling her daughter in the morning. She said, I showed this picture to your dad. He thinks it can't be just a coincidence. The girl's appearance, name and age. He said he'd run it through the old channels. Whose kid is this? Profile says the mom gave her up. Do you want to adopt her? Yeah. I feel something close, like I've seen it somewhere before. Remember that dream you told me about after Glinka died years ago? Isn't that the same girl in the locket picture? Sharon thought for a few seconds, then uttered, That's right. You, Jennifer, have you signed up for where yet? Foster parent school? They won't just let you adopt a girl. You have to go through training, get the paperwork together. You're right. We'll get on it today. After a week that wasn't consumed with thoughts of illness, constantly leafing through pictures of the girl, reading the information written in her profile over and over again, the training didn't come easily to Annie and John. The husband alerted the orphanage staff that Annie was the one he wanted to adopt and asked, Are there any other families willing to take the girl in with them? No, the director replied. Are you the first this year? Annie is a difficult child. In what way she believes her real mom will come for her, says she dreams about her mother. And sometimes if she rejects you, don't be frightened. Do you know what a woman who dreams looks like? She has blue eyes, big lips, and russet waves of pure hair. From what we gather, she is very wealthy a child. What can you say? Pay no attention to her fantasies, laughed the principal. I'd love to. But you just described my wife. Annie's father called her at the end of the week. What's the news, Dad? She asked. Shocking, love. You'd better sit down. Annie sank into a chair and said, Annie is a relative of mine. Yeah, not just any relative. She's your daughter. Annie was speechless for a while at what she heard. Those bastards switched the baby at the maternity hospital, the father continued. And Sharon showed up when you were in labor and bribed the birthing staff with huge sums of money. They switched your daughter with a dead baby girl delivered by an alcoholic. She didn't want your baby anyway. She gave it to an orphanage. Tears flowed from her eyes. God, why did she do that? So that an heiress wouldn't show up later claiming her son's estate. They were afraid of trouble. The bastards, so that she would die with her damn son, the girl shouted through her tears. They're willing to ruin someone else's life for their money. It may not be long before she dies. If it's any consolation, the father said. Annie stopped crying and asked, What do you mean? There's a rumor that she has cancer. They found her. John's driving around town, paler than a dead man, because of it a few months later, having gathered all the necessary paperwork and passed the background checks. Annie saw her daughter in person for the first time. Excited, John asked, looking at his wife. She nodded. Her husband took her hand and together they waited for the girl to appear. Annie walked determinedly into the room and froze, looking at her mom. Hi, Mom said with a smile. Tears ran down the little girl's cheeks and she threw herself around Annie's neck, screaming, Mommy, I knew you'd come for me. I knew it. Annie hugged her daughter and said, I'm so glad I found you. You lost me. Yep, she nodded in response. When all the papers were signed, and the family was getting into the car, Annie's cell phone rang. Deciding not to take the call in the car, she stepped aside and said, Hello, hello. Who am I talking to? Annie. Hello. This is the voice of Catherine Wilson, John's mother. What had instantly made her feel sad. I know what you've done, Annie shouted. I know you switched my daughter and made me go through the funeral of my own child. What more do you want from me? There was a pause. How do you know? Catherine Wilson asked. I have my sources, Catherine. I was just about to tell you about it. I don't believe you, replied Annie. Believe me, Annie, I don't need to take that kind of sin on my soul. Have you taken her yet? Yes, but don't expect to get her again. I warn you, if you ever do anything to me or her again, I swear to God I will kill you myself. Don't, Annie. I've done a terrible thing to her and to you. I'm sorry, please. Oh, these roses are gorgeous. What's the occasion for such a gorgeous bouquet? Grace asked. Is it for me? Or are we going to someone's house? You're a champion. Honey, I love you. Kieran held out roses to Grace. You know that, don't you? So without further ado, marry me. Grace waited for a moment for further developments. Then she raised her eyebrows and said disappointedly, "Is that all? What do you mean?" "I don't understand," replied Kieran. "Isn't that a marriage proposal?" "Silly. What do you mean?" "I want you to be my wife, to live a long and happy life together, to have children." "I don't understand." "Is that the best you can do?" Grace asked unhappily. "Where's the celebration? Where's the ring? You should at least look on the internet to see how men propose to girls." "We'll go to a restaurant and celebrate," said Kieran. "What about the ring? What about the video of you proposing?" "Grace, what's the big deal? We love each other, we want to get married. What's all the fuss? What's with all the hoopla? I'm a simple man. I'm just saying what I can say." "I want a ring for your marriage proposal," said Grace, resentfully. "Everyone will laugh at me when I tell them you proposed and didn't give me a ring." Grace let out a tear. "God, I'll be embarrassed in front of the others. And even embarrassed. I'd be humiliated to the core." "Who's going to ask you about the ring? Who needs it? Is it so fundamental? You have to have a ring and no other way. I just thought it would be better to use the money for a trip after the wedding." Kieran smiled and hugged Grace. "That'll be the ring for you." "You're crazy," she pushed him away, her tears drying in a flash. "A wedding trip? You're clearly out of your mind. What haven't we seen? Hanging around in buses, swallowing dust, listening to tedious lectures from tour guides. What kind of wedding trip is that? It's horrible. Who would you tell about a honeymoon like that?" "We'd be laughed at," Grace said, indignantly. "People go abroad and we're like idiots on some itinerary. We should go to Turkey as a last resort." "Who's going to laugh?" Kieran was getting nervous. "Who cares about our lives?" "Grace, you're saying the wrong thing. Turkey can wait. We haven't seen anything here." "And I don't want to see anything here," Grace said sharply. "What's good here? Married? I want a good life, to be envied, not pitied. Well, don't all your friends get a ring and go abroad? I know some of them don't even have boyfriends and don't get married. Why do I have to settle for the worst? I want the best." "Kieran." Grace laughed out of turn and hugged him. "When should one want everything but when one is young? Later, when we are old and sick, we shall not want anything. But now I want it. I really want the ring, and Turkey, and the video." "I'm afraid your demands don't match my possibilities," said Kieran sadly. "What else do you want to know here on the shore? Or when we're going to set sail for the voyage of a lifetime? I'm afraid I can't give you what you want. I also want a home, our home, or home, where it's just you and me and our children, where there's no one else, no parents, no grandparents. Just you and me," Grace said. "I wanted this to be a surprise to you," Kieran smiled. "I'll tell you. You and I are going to have a house like this, or rather we already have one. My grandmother will move in with my mom and dad, and we'll move into her house. My grandmother gave me a gift. She gave me a deed to her house. Can you believe it, Grace?" Grace looked at her husband-to-be's satisfied face. The smile slipped from her face, and from the expression on her face, Kieran realized that the surprise had failed. "What kind of house is this?" Grace said with a tone that tolerated no objection. "It's a 60s Khrushchevka. My idea of a house is at least 2 stories, floor-to-ceiling windows, underfloor heating. And I walk barefoot on the warm floor. Look through these windows and enjoy this house. This is home." "Grace, your dreams are unrealistic," Kieran objected. "Other people live in apartments all their lives. They don't have a place to live and don't expect to. We have a whole house, 4 rooms, a kitchen, a veranda. We can add a bathroom. Why should we add new old things to old things?" "It is old," Grace said. "And then, I told you before, why should we look up to those who are doing worse than we are? We have to reach for the best, strive for it, and then everything will work out." I'm sure of it. You'll see, Kieran. Everything will work out and we'll have everything. You just have to want it badly enough. I see that potential in you. Otherwise, I wouldn't have chosen you and loved you. I will always be there for you and support you because I love you so much. I love you so much. Let's start over. Do what again? Kieran didn't understand. I accept the bouquet. It's not going anywhere. Flowers don't last forever. And you properly organize a marriage proposal. Get ready. Buy a ring, but make sure it's a diamond. Even if it's small, it has to be a diamond. Book a restaurant, invite your friends, have a professional video shoot, maybe some fireworks, the whole thing. Grace, I don't like the whole staged thing. It just feels so fake to me. I'll feel like a clown. Love is a two-person feeling. It likes silence, not fireworks. And I really, really want it all. For me, for my lovely future wife. Can you make it happen? I need it, Kieran. She looked ingratiatingly into his eyes and asked, Please, Kieran. Kieran once again tried to convince Grace that this was an unpleasant situation for him. Grace, here you keep saying that you want to be envied. Why would you do that? Because everyone knows that envy is a bad thing, both for the person who's envious and the person who's envious. I feel good when I'm envied. It makes me feel so euphoric, so energized, so sweet, Grace replied. Naughty. She laughed. That's the kind of wife you're going to have, Kieran. Not vicious, but determined. I look envious men in the eye and taunt them with my superiority over them, the wretches. Grace, you are also a great sinner, said Kieran, putting his arms around her and kissing her. Then he looked intently into her eyes, which were burning with a passion he did not know, and said, Pride in you is overflowing, and this is a great sin. But I love you. I love you. Since when are you such a believer? Grace asked quietly. Well, it's all right. It's the way it should be. Different poles attract. You and I are so different. I'm the devil by your standards. You're an angel. And we're drawn to each other. That's love, Kieran, Grace whispered in his ear, her voice husky. He recognized that intonation when her voice became unreal, with an altered timbre. It meant she was aroused and wanted him. I love you like this. Yes, darling, yes, Grace whispered. That's what love is, and love justifies everything. Grace had everything she wanted: a marriage proposal, a party, a ring, a noisy company, a video shoot, and even fireworks. And most importantly, she saw the envy in her friend's eyes, unconcealed envy. And from that, as she thought, the holiday was a success. This is how she will go through life, so that everyone envies her and burst from this envy. And Kieran, although he has his own opinion, Grace knows how to tame him and direct him in the right direction. In spite of everyone, she will be happy, and she and Kieran will have everything they want. They just have to want it badly enough. The wedding of Kieran and Grace also thundered on a large scale, accompanied by noisy fun and videotaping. Afterwards, they visited Turkey, realizing their wish at her behest. Such noisy festivities were not in keeping with Kieran's character. He was very tired. Very tired. Even a vacation in Turkey had not done him any good. He was glad it was time to go to work. Grace's energy kept him on his toes. Maybe those who lived together before marriage are right. At least they could figure out if they could live together. Or were they so different that living together was impossible? Kieran loved Grace very much, so he could not propose an unofficial marriage to her. He felt he would humiliate her with this proposal. He thought Grace deserved to be a real, legal wife. So a little old-fashioned, or rather, not modern at all, was Kieran. And all because of the way he'd been brought up. Both grandmother and mom and dad were educated, cultured people, and always resented the relationship between a guy and a girl, like try to live together, and then already in register marriage. mother, and especially grandmother, could not understand how these cohabitants had already had 2 children, and still could not make up their minds whether to get married or to try further. That's why such relationships were taboo for Kieran. But now, yes, he's very tired of Grace. I think with the money we have left after the vacation, we should make some cosmetic repairs in the house, said Kieran, when he and Grace moved into the house of his grandmother. Not at all, Grace replied emphatically. I don't see the point of such an investment. We should build the new house we want behind this house. And then this one should be demolished, Kieran grinned. Who are we? Do you know how much money is needed for such a dream? We don't have that much money, and we don't know if we will have it. We need more than the crumbs we have left from the gift money to start building. It starts small, Grace said confidently. We'll get a loan from the bank and we'll build. Not invest in this old place, but build a house from scratch that will really be ours. Unrealistic, said Kieran. I don't earn enough to get into bank debt. They'll find you another job. We'll cover the loan with our main salary and live on our part-time jobs. And your salary? It won't be part of our family budget? Kieran asked. Well, Kieran, how could you ask me that? I didn't expect that from you. Grace laughed, switching to a joking tone. I am a woman. I have my own needs. I need money for them too. So my salary will be used for those proverbial pins. And then the house and the lot are yours alone. What's the point of me investing in it? We'll build the house together. What if I get thrown overboard? Grace, what are you thinking? We just got married. What about me? It's life, Kieran. Life and realities. And unfortunately, that's what they are. When you get divorced, you take what's yours. But I didn't get married to get divorced. Grace, listen to me. We don't need a new house. We can fix this one up. And 4 rooms, stone walls. It'll last us a lifetime. You're talking like an old man for our lifetime. Kieran, we live in a different century with all the benefits and innovations. Why should we live in the old way? Don't you realize how great it is to live in a smart house where everything is automated? Come on, Kieran, don't be shy. You're a man. And as you know, a man should build a house, raise a son, and plant a tree. I'll help you with the son and the tree, and you build a house. Be a man, said Grace. Let's not put off finding a job for you. I'll get right on it. You see how strong my ambition is. I'm willing to help you in any way I can, to support you. You can count on me. Tomorrow we'll go to the bank and find out what's going on. I've sketched the house. Look. Look at this. Look at the gorgeous house we're going to have. Grace opened her laptop, called Kieran, and, smiling in anticipation of surprising her husband, said, Come on, come here, look. There's too much information, there's too much of everything, and there's too much of you, Kieran wanted to say. And we won't go to the bank tomorrow. We've got to think about it. While you're thinking, the dollar will rise. You've got to think fast. This is the age of quick decisions. The bolder, the better. Or, if I understand correctly, are you going to live in this barn for the rest of your life? No, Kieran, I don't believe I was wrong about you. You're smart, you're determined, and you're a man. That's how I saw you when I married you. Come here, come here. Kieran reluctantly walked over to his wife and sat down beside her. He was looking at his laptop, listening, but he couldn't hear Grace. He was tired, very tired. Son, are you all right? Ciaran was asked by Ciara's mom. I look at you, you are not like the newlyweds, frowning, tired. Things not going well with you and Grace. I'm fine, Mom. I'm just really tired. I've been working a lot. You know, Grace and I are going to build a new house. I've been working part-time, telecommuting. Honestly, I'm not getting enough sleep. Kieran, would you say I'm meddling? But son, you've got to understand, Your health is more important than a new house. You'll have a house, but your health will be gone forever. Sick people are not happy about anything, not even new houses. It's your decision to build a house. It's my and Grace's decision, Kieran replied. My boy Ciara hugged her son and stroked his shoulder. If you can't afford to build a house, you shouldn't tear yourself up like that. Sick, tired husbands are not necessary for people like Grace. Kieran answered his mother sharply. Don't. I don't want to hear it. Don't say anything bad about Grace to me. She is my wife. Ciara sighed. A wife takes care of her husband, not pulls the life out of him. I can see everything, son. I have eyes and ears. You've been too hasty with Grace, son. She needs another man, a man like her. Why did you raise me like this? Kieran asked, and putting his arms around his mother's neck like a child, he cried. I'm weak, mother, weak. No, Kieran, you're not weak. The mother stroked her son's head. You're not a pushover. You're not a bore or a scoundrel or a peddler. I don't know. Maybe in this day and age that's a disadvantage rather than an advantage. Your father and I raised you to be a decent man, and we're proud of you. And Grace needs a man with qualities that you don't have. A man who will go over your head and do whatever it takes to get what he wants. If you want to build the house Grace is claiming with your hard-earned money, you're gonna kill yourself, son. Mom, but I love Grace. She's pregnant. We're having a baby, and I promised her this house. I can't not keep my word. This is where I regret raising you to be a man of your word. Can't you build a smaller house? Grace designed it herself, shows it off to everyone, brags about it, and that's why you can't back down. Ciara sighed heavily and said, I have a serious talk for you, son. Come on, I'll feed you. We can talk about it. Mom, thanks, I'm not hungry. No, Kieran, you've lost weight. What's wrong with that? Come on. Ciara took her son under her arm and they went into the kitchen. It's delicious as always, Kieran smiled after the meal. Now we'll talk. You think better on a full stomach, smiled his mother. Have you taken a loan from the bank yet? No, not yet. We're going this week. Grace and Kieran sat in the kitchen with Ciara. Granny's got some money too, said Ciara. We can lend it to you on your own recognizance. When you can, and if you can pay it back. Then why the receipt? Don't you trust me, mother? Kieran was surprised. The receipt. Let it be a document for Grace. I know how unpredictable she is. I told you not to speak ill of Grace, Kieran frowned. Did I say anything bad? You're just in the wrong sled. Son, Ciara sighed. Oh, Kieran, it's great that we don't have to go to the bank, Grace said brightly. Listen, since we have money to build a house, why don't we buy me a car on credit? Why? Do you have a second job? We can afford it. My belly's gonna grow soon. Where will I go with it on the shuttle buses? And then the baby comes, how am I supposed to carry it? Wait, Grace. Kieran stopped her. The money for the house came with conditions. What conditions? Grace asked unhappily. Well, for one thing, it's a loan. Here's a receipt notarized by a notary. And secondly, on the condition that I'll work only at my main job, I'll give up my part-time job. And we won't say you're moonlighting, Grace smiled conspiratorially. But if we don't, who's going to know? Grace, honey, I want a car so badly. I can't even imagine driving to work. Everyone would be jealous, she laughed. I'm not buying you a car. I feel sorry for people. Don't let anyone die. Let them live. Kieran tried to turn the conversation into a joking mode. Kieran, please, please. A car for a woman is a necessity, Grace whimpered. Grace. I don't know if it's jealousy or work that's going to kill me. Is that what you want? Kieran answered his wife seriously. Can't you see I'm having a hard time? I sleep for 3 hours, I get up at 6, and then the money is on loan. I have to pay it back from every paycheck. I'll cover the debt. What do you mean, on credit? They're your parents. Won't they forgive you for this money? They gave us all their money, Grace persisted. Do you understand that? Kieran asked. Do you really think I'd leave my parents without money? I don't know, Grace shrugged. Other parents forgive. And then they won't even have time to save for retirement. They're past their youth. They don't have a lot of wishes. They could have sacrificed that much money for their own son. Grace smiled and pouted like a child. Do you really want your wife to work her ass off on the buses? Mom was right, Kieran thought. That's why she had the debt notarized. Grace's needs not everyone can handle. Look, Grace, ask your parents for money for a car. Kieran dared to say. His wife's demands were starting to piss him off. I'll tell you right away, I'll give up my part-time job. Don't even think about it. I'm not able to work nights. Do you hear yourself? Grace was indignant. I have a husband, and I'm going to beg my parents for money for a car. Kieran, have you humiliated yourself like this? Kieran was silent. He realized that no matter what he said, Grace would have only her own opinion, and it was the right one. I'll quit my second job, I'll pay off my parents' debt, I'll keep building the house. I'm not counting on a car. And that's my final answer, Kieran reported to his wife. And now I have to sleep, and how do you want to sleep? How can you talk to me like that? I'm pregnant, and you're getting on my nerves. Grace burst into tears. Who's getting on whose nerves? Stop crying, kitten. Kieran hugged his wife. Let's go to bed, and you think about what I'm asking of you. Wine? A car is a necessity for a woman and not a whim. A lot of promises that you'll think about it. Don't get your hopes up. You know I keep my word, and I'm keeping it this time, Grace persisted. She realized that after going to her parents' house, Kieran had become so uncooperative. His mommy must have told him that. No, now they would go to Kieran's parents together. Grace thought, I must shield him from the influence of parental discipleship. I'm a wife now, and I'm the only one who should influence my husband. And the parents have finished their mission of education, and Kieran is not a boy to be danced to. He's a man who has to support and care for his family. I'll give my mother-in-law my opinion. She wouldn't dare come between me and Kieran. A man should have one woman to guide him through life. Mother's time is over. It's me now, Grace, Kieran's life guide. Kieran, darling, I love you so much. You realize that love isn't given to everyone, only to the chosen few. Your God must love you because I have you here with me. No one will ever love you like that. No one ever will. Embracing her husband, Grace whispered, I promised you a son. And now I've kept my promise. We already have one. All that's left is for him to be born. Can you imagine, our favorite son? Kieran was happy with Grace being ever so slightly enthusiastic, but demanding nothing from him. They lay, they talked, they kissed. They loved each other. And in this moment there was no talk of the house, of how Grace would put it up, of how far her dreams had come, and how she was going to work hard to make those. And for Kieran, unrealistic dreams come true in their lives. He was grateful to her for these rare moments of respite from material things, because it was in these moments that he was truly happy. The rest of the time he was tired of Grace's bursting energy, of her plans, which were gaining momentum, demanding unrealistic investments. And then after that incident, Kieran realized that if she was up to something, she would achieve it by any means necessary. All means are good for her desires. That incident shocked him, and he realized that there would be many such cases and he should be ready for them. "Do you love me?" Grace put her arms around her husband and pressed herself against him. Oh, do you hear our Vincent beating?" "We've heard it already," she said to the fetus, tapping his belly. Not yet, Grace. I've asked you 100 times not to address the unborn child by name. Do you ever listen to me? Even though I forget." "Oh, don't be angry. Won't you do me this little favor?" My motherly whim. "You're so angry that I'm afraid to admit to you my little wish." "What else?" Kieran asked unhappily. "I hope it's not a dream of a yacht." "Oh, I'll be braver now. Because what I have acquired is such a trifle compared to a yacht." Kieran looked at her fearfully. Come on. I'll show you my little girl." Grace took her husband's hand and led him out of the gate. A red car was parked outside their house. "How was it?" "It's a lot cheaper than a yacht, Kitty. Honey, I'm so happy. Even though I'm on maternity leave, I'll drive my baby to work tomorrow. They're gonna die of jealousy. Can you imagine their faces?" Grace talked, and he couldn't hear her words out of shock. Just a high, skinny voice, like a pesky fly. Come on, I'll show you." "You'll see how great it is," Grace chirped and tugged Kieran's hand. "You've already taken me for a ride," Kieran said, emphasizing the word already. He pulled his hand out of his wife's and asked what money was used to buy this baby. He had never spoken so rudely to Grace before, but here he could not bear it. He couldn't help himself. "Are you out of your mind? We're building a house. I was against the car. Why don't you listen to me? You only hear yourself. Sometimes I think you're insane." Grace's eyes filled with tears, and she threw a violent tantrum. Kieran didn't want to see the tantrum and thus encourage it. He did not rush to comfort her. He turned around and went home. He waited for her to show up, but she wasn't. Kieran got worried and went outside. Neither Grace nor the car was there. Where was she? Where had she gone? The distraught pregnant woman got behind the wheel and sped off. Where would he look for her? He called her cell phone. The calls came in, but she didn't answer. His head split in two with worry. He began to get headaches very often. It had never happened before. But once he got married, it became a frequent occurrence. Kieran went into the house, took his medicine, made another call, and heard Grace's cell phone in her bag lying on the couch. He called Grace's parents, but she wasn't there, and her friends didn't have her either. She got home late, close to midnight, and as if nothing had happened, she rattled on. "Kotik. You can't imagine how everyone sighed with envy when they saw my little girl. I'm in a wonderful mood, even though you're mad at me. No one's going to ruin my happiness. So Kitty, no need to get upset and get on each other's nerves. It's done." Kieran was silent. He was so nervous that his headache wouldn't let go. You feel good when others feel bad. Vampire was all Kieran could say. Yes, I'm your little vampire," Grace adopted a playful tone. "And now I'm going to bite you, and then I'm going to kiss you." She threw herself around Kieran's neck, but he pulled her away from him. "I can't see you. I can't. Go away nicely." "Where would I go, Kieran? I'm your wife. And as you know, husband and wife are the same Satan. And then we'll have a son." "Satan is you," Kieran said. "I'm beginning to realize that we've rushed into marriage. You and I are different, you know. I think I'll have to put up with you and your delusions all my life." "I'm getting a headache." I'm sorry, Kieran," Grace cried. "I know it must be hard for you, but it's only at first. It's like that for everyone, until you get used to each other. And then they get used to it and become one. Understand, my dear man. Love is not for everyone. And I love you so much. I can't do it without you. I can't. Where did you get the money for the car? Kieran interrupted Grace's passionate speech. I'm talking about love, you're talking about money. So which one of us is the mercenary? I asked you a question. How hard is it to answer without all the waterworks? Just answer. I bought it on credit. I made the down payment with the money you were saving for your parents. Grace stopped talking. I suppose you'd better not know where the money is, said Kieran. You'll be on maternity leave with the baby. How are you going to pay off the loan? It's not that much money, though. The car isn't cheap. I think we'll be able to pay it off in no time. Who's we? I. Grace grinned. We were plowing, said the fly that sat on the ox's horns. Well, you're the fly, the annoying fly that's bothering me, and I want to swat it in one fell swoop to be free of it. Don't do that, Kieran stopped himself. I promise it won't happen again. Believe me, we'll have a child, your son and mine. We'll have a new home. Imagine how happy we'll be. We'll come to each other. You'll see how great it will be. Now, if he had any money, Kieran kept it only on his card. The PIN number, known only to him, was unknown to Grace. He knew it was dangerous to keep money in the house without consulting him. Grace instantly found a use for it. For a time, Grace ceased her frenetic activity about the ideas and prospects she was creating for her husband. A child was born in Los Angeles, and she was fully immersed in motherhood, which pleased Kieran very much. Grace was probably right. Kieran thought it would take time for them to get used to each other. 6 months had passed since the birth of baby Vader, and Grace had resumed her efforts in the area of perfecting her family. She realized that their house was being built, and it was her credit. She had insisted on such a beautiful, comfortable, modern home. She had bought herself a car, it is true, against Kieran's wishes, but how comfortable she is now. And then it was her dream come true, too. Kieran took a break from her ideas. Time to get back into work, Grace thought. Otherwise, if her husband isn't pushed to exploits, the mire of a frustrated bog awaits him. There needs to be movement. Movement is life. I will not let Kieran die in this quagmire. I will push him forward, encourage him. We'll get to such heights, everyone will gasp and die of envy. Kieran, have you thought about changing jobs? Grace asked. You can't stay in the same rut with a steady paycheck. I think a man needs development, to move up, to feel on top of things. Somehow, Kieran, you've accepted your average salary, your status as a manager. If you see that the job is unpromising, is it worth holding on to it? I see your potential and I think you're capable of more. I'm happy with the job, Kieran replied. And then Grace. It's not easy to find a high-paying job in this town. This isn't Los Angeles. The rates are different here. And I think I have a pretty good job and the pay is pretty good. Not bad, Grace repeated, as if tasting the word. She was silent for a moment, as if giving Kieran time to consider the term. And then she said, not bad means nothing. Kieran, you're 31 years old, and you have a pretty good job with a pretty good salary. And at the moment you have a lot of debt, and you're willing to put up with it. Is that how I see it? What do you want from me? Kieran sighed. I'll tell you right away, I won't be able to work nights. I've been having these headaches lately. I'm not happy about the white light, so I realize that night work won't do me any good. Who said anything about night work? Grace was outraged. I'm talking about changing jobs. You know what I mean, Kieran? You know it's impossible to get a high-paying job without connections, and you can count on me. You want me to find you a job like that. But where would you find it? Grace, don't be ridiculous on the internet. Kieran grinned. No, not like that, she said. I'm not stupid enough to look for a prestigious job on the internet. I still have some connections from the past. I can build bridges and try to find you something more worthy of your intelligence and your knowledge. How would you feel about that? Grace, did you have such a past? Kieran wondered. Were you what? Am I jealous of your past? Grace laughed. Well, that's silly. Didn't you have one before me? And then I worked for this big company and I was in good standing. That's all it was. Why did you leave such a great company? I'm afraid you wouldn't believe it. Grace hesitated, or you'd take it the wrong way, so I'd rather not talk about it. But I'd like to know what pitfalls to expect if you're going to put me in there. Okay, Grace sighed. Just promise not to jump to conclusions. Listen. My boss's wife was jealous of me for him, but not of the boss himself, but of the head of the department I worked in. That's funny, Kieran snorted. But you couldn't prove your innocence? I wasn't going to prove it, it's beyond me, Grace said. I just quit, that's all. And you want people to say behind my back that I'm the husband of the woman who was having an affair with the boss. I knew it, Grace said sharply. I didn't, and haven't been hooking up with anyone. And you're a man. Are you afraid of some idle gossip? It's ridiculous. Kieran, if you're a man, you should be afraid of small wages, low ranks, and poverty, not gossip. We have a son growing up. He needs a good kindergarten, not a bunch of snotty kids where he'll always be sick, but a real elite one. Then you are not going to give him to a simple high school, where they raise drug addicts and alcoholics for the future of the country. Grace kept coming at him. The kid should be in a school with good kids from good families, not with the rabble where he's going to become the same rabble. Grace, you're making it worse, Kieran objected. I went to high school and, as you can see, I didn't become a rabble. Don't compare, Grace said. It's a different time. The worthy join the worthy. And the trash? She didn't finish. She stood up abruptly and went into the other room. Then she stopped at the door, turned around and said, think about all this at your leisure. In a word, I'm right. And you know it. When you've thought it over, you'll say. The dream house was built, and Kieran's family moved in. Kieran, it's time to tear down that shed that's such an eyesore, Grace said. We'll plant roses and weed the lawn and all that. I'll go out to the kitchen in the morning and look at the beauty of it. It'll make me thirsty. This shed prevents me from realizing my plans to transform the landscape around the house. It's going to take a lot of money to demolish the house. And your landscape, too. Kieran shook his head. So my solution is not to demolish the house, but to renovate it with the money that would have gone into demolishing it. I can't demolish the house my grandparents built. You're crazy. Grace gasped. You've made up your mind? Did you ask me? Do you ask me when you've made up your mind? Was the wedding according to your plan? Did you plan the vacation? Did you design the house? I bought the car on my own. Did you ask me? Are you going to do this for the rest of your life? I'm going to have this barn and this car in my face. Grace was torn up with emotion. I wanted what was best. I wanted our child to walk and play on the lawn, not bump into that shed. Shut up. Kieran couldn't help himself. And don't call the house where my parents were born a barn. There's no telling how things will turn out. Maybe someone else will have to live in this house. I could use the extra room. It would prevent me from being completely happy. Grace took a breath. I didn't envision our home that way, and this shed is a hindrance to that. Kieran glanced at his wife, and she stopped talking. And you know, Kieran, people will come to the housewarming party and be surprised by this wreck in the middle of the yard. The old house steals the impression of the new. I don't think anyone's going to be jealous to see that wretched thing in the yard. It's a good thing they won't. They'll sleep better. Kieran interrupted her rudely. You don't think they will this time? Accept it. And even your tears won't make me back down. After the quarrel, Grace did not speak to her husband for a week. She hoped to get what she wanted by keeping quiet. But she realized Kieran wasn't that simple. Once he'd said something, he was unlikely to change his mind. But that's all right, she'll get her way in other ways. Grace, as a hostess, was proud of her brainchild and showed the guests the possibilities of the smart house. Despite the old house in the backyard, everyone admired the new home. But she didn't invite guests just to show off. She had her own plans for them. She decided to tear down the old house with their hands to get their support. Well, it certainly worked out the way Kieran and I wanted it to, Grace said at the party table. But Kieran doesn't want to tear down the old house. He thinks it's appropriate here. Personally, I don't think so. So I'd like to get some outside opinions. Do you think there's a need for an old hut next to this magnificent house? Hearing such unpleasant words about her house, Grandma was saddened. She lowered her head and smoothed the folds of her skirt. She cried furtively, quickly wiping away her tears with her handkerchief so no one would notice. Kieran's mother put her arms around his grandmother and pulled her close. Kieran saw all of this. He was ashamed of his wife's words in front of his grandmother and in front of his parents. Of course, a lot of people had come to the housewarming party, and he didn't want to find out about it. He didn't want to spoil the holiday for those who came to enjoy their new home and have fun. I wouldn't tear the house down either, said Ivan, Kieran's friend. I would renovate it, make it into an extra living space. No one could use the extra living space. On the contrary, many at the table supported Ivan, which upset Grace very much. She realized she had lost this time. If it weren't for my parents and my grandmother, this house wouldn't exist, said Kieran. Let's drink to their health, he said to the guests. My loved ones, my dear ones, thank you for everything. Kieran went to his mother, father, and grandmother and kissed them. What about me? Don't I get a thank you? Grace said resentfully. If it wasn't for me. Of course, everyone heard the indignation of the mistress of the house, but realized that it was not worth focusing on her offended words. Everyone supported the toast. The guests made praised toasts in honor of the hosts. The guests cheered, and Grace did not feel her triumph. She was not envious of the people who had come to the housewarming party. They just shared the joy, cheered, and for some reason praised Kieran and his parents, but not her. She was the one who had built the house thanks to her kicking, and his parents' money had been given not for nothing, but as a loan. Why were you pouting all evening? Kieran asked his wife. Well, it's not proper to invite people and sit like a mouse on the croup. He hugged her, kissed her on the temple. My little mouse, look, you'll burst. Kieran wanted to cheer up his wife. So all smart and clever, all honored, all participants in the construction of the house, I'm the only one on the side. Grace was indignant. And why didn't you say that your beloved grandmother, Daddy and Mommy gave you the money on credit? Why did you sing such dithyrambs to them? Didn't you know that? If we had borrowed the money from the bank, the interest would have cost us another house, Kieran explained. Grace, you know all about that. And then my parents forgave me half of the money and gave it to my grandmother to rebuild the house. Oh, so that's it. I'm nobody here, and my name is nobody. And that's the last I'll know, Grace said, indignantly. I only found out about it today. My dad told me about it, that it was their housewarming gift to us. Kieran changed his tone. Grace, well, since we don't have to pay off the debt, let's hire a housekeeper. Look how big the house is, how much cleaning there is, especially today after the guests so many dishes to wash. You have a dishwasher, said Kieran. But you have to get the dishes ready before it. I don't think I can do it alone. Why did you have to build such a big house? Convenience, Grace said sharply. Convenience. What's the point of hiring a housekeeper? And then you haven't even gone to work yet. Can't you handle it? Of course I can't. There's house after house after house, and that old house of yours. I'm prioritizing the baby. I told you I could call you about a job that pays twice your salary. A good one. You don't say anything, so you're okay with the pittance you get. And we have to suffer because our breadwinner is happy with a good salary. I get it, said Kieran. Because no one was jealous of you today, you decided to take out your anger on me. You know what I'll tell you? This house was built because I loved you, and I promised it to you. Or rather, you made me promise you. I was building it. And I already knew it then. We didn't understand each other, and we never will. No matter what kind of house we live in, happiness doesn't depend on the wall. Honestly, I hate this house. Everything revolves around it. Where are we? Grace? Where are we? Is the house more important than our feelings? With this house and your crazy ideas, we've lost everything we had. 4 years we lived with you. We built a house, and that's it. We have no common ground, Grace sighed. So while we were building the house, we had something in common, and now we don't. Isn't our baby Vincent a common ground? Grace, we dreamed of this house. We dreamed of how happy we'd be to live in it, Kieran said. You were the one who dreamed of it. I was just the doer. I don't want to stay in this house. I have a terrible headache from your arguments, your frustrations, and your irritation. I'm going to sleep at Grandma's house. Is that what you're going to keep it for? To run away from me? Kieran didn't respond to his wife's words, only shut the door tightly behind him. Grace went into the kitchen. She didn't want to look out of the windows at that hut on chicken legs. For the first time in their 4 years together, Kieran had not slept with her, had defiantly gone to that hovel she hated. No, she doesn't want that kind of strife. First, he will not lie in the marital bed. Then he will find himself a mistress. And then, perhaps, will wish to divorce her. That's something she can't let happen. She can't find a man like Kieran. She's not so stupid, she realizes that. Besides, where would she go in the event of a divorce? Her parents? No. By any means necessary, she'll still be the mistress of this magnificent house. Kieran's not exactly a star in the sky, but he does his best for his family. And that's the kind of husband you'll find. And then a father is better than a stepfather for her child. Kieran loves Vincent very much, but you can't play on his love for a child for long. You've got to be more subtle. Kieran didn't go into the new house. Grace watched from the window as he left for work, and for the first time they didn't have breakfast together, so he's still angry with her. And by the looks of it, there'd be more fighting tonight. She had to get the house in order, cook something nice for dinner after the guests, and be sure to have candles to make it intimate and romantic. Grace decided that she needed to clean herself up too, so that Kieran could see who he was trying to make a deal with. What's a wife like her to look for? And the fact that she was pushing him to some small victories. So it was again only a plus for her. Without her initiative, they would live in this shack with paper wallpaper. Grace didn't like the fact that Kieran was stubborn, unwilling to take the high-paying job. She'd already made inquiries, got her ex-lover involved. There's a place, but they won't wait long. We need to get Kieran and push him into a position that would bring them good money. Of course, the work there is nervous. The state constantly allocates money for government contracts, so there are frequent inspections, audits, where auditors pick on every comma. Not everyone can withstand such nervous tension. Despite high salaries, people often quit. That's why it's possible to get Kieran a job there. Kieran, don't do that again. I was up all night. I'm used to having you with me at night. I was scared. I wanted to call you, but I was afraid you'd start fighting with me again. I know you're tired. The guest had been drinking, so he got a little hasty. Maybe I'm wrong about something, but you're wrong too, honey. No matter how much we fight, we should sleep together. I didn't sleep all night either, said Kieran. And I was scared about the way we were living, you know. I thought about it for a long time, and I realized that you and I are not a couple. We're so different sometimes it's impossible. You only think about material things? I don't deny that our world is real, and it takes money. But I can't give you as much money as you want. You'd better find another man to encourage your ideas. I'm willing to give you your freedom. Let's get a divorce. I can't take it anymore, you know. I can't. Don't you love me anymore? Grace immediately burst into tears. Baby, how could I be without you? How could Vincent be without you? Do you really want your son to be raised by someone else's uncle? When the most difficult part of our life is over, do you suddenly think about it, Kieran? Grace sat down next to her husband and put her arms around him. Look at me, look at me. Can't you see how much I love you? No, I can't have a divorce. And I don't want any other man. You may not believe me, but I can't live without you, and I don't want to live without you. Do you really want our baby to be without a mother? What do you mean motherless? Kieran didn't understand. Will you leave Vincent with me in the divorce? I don't mind. I don't mind at all. Mom and Grandma will help me raise him. What's Granny and Mommy got to do with it? Of course, when I'm gone, they can help you. You misunderstand me, Kieran. If you leave me, I'll kill myself. And it's not just words or threats. If you want to know the truth of my promises, divorce me, and you'll find out how you'll live with it, Kieran. And what will you tell your son when he grows up and asks you why I did it? It's blackmail. That's all I need. I didn't think you were capable of that. I'm not. It's not blackmail, Kieran, it's love. I can't imagine life without you. That's the truth. Don't drive me away, my love. Grace sobbed. Let me stay by your side and let me love you. Is that too much to ask? Kieran realized that the whole thing seemed like a cheap candlelight performance. But knowing Grace's mobile psyche, where tears for no reason at all, where tears could turn into laughter in a minute, what the hell, maybe her suicide threats weren't so unfounded. If that happens, he really won't forgive himself. He was so tired of it all. Kieran realized that he had been up all night and had a terrible headache. I want to sleep, he said. I have a headache. Where are the medicines? I don't know where they are in this house yet. Peace. Sweet peace. Grace looked into her husband's eyes and said, You're going to see how great things are going to be with you and me. You won't regret that we didn't get divorced. I said, I have a headache. Give me a pill. This time there was no danger of divorce. Grace saw that Kieran was determined to break up, but fell for her threat to kill herself. So he was scared. And that's good for her. She'll know how to manipulate her husband. It's time for Grace to come back to work from maternity leave. So she decides to use one more trick on her husband. She's going to try to squeeze him after all. He'll take the job she got him. Although, I'm not going back to my old job. I quit. What's wrong with your job? No new people to envy you, Kieran grinned. I know you meant it as a joke, to poke fun at me. But it's not about envy. Someone in our family has to earn money if you won't take that responsibility. I have to provide for my family. I'll get a job, I can hire a housekeeper. I won't have time to take care of the house. I have to put the baby in a high-end daycare center. I'm not putting Vincent in a breeding ground for infections. And I need money for that too. Did you get a job like that? Where do they pay the money you're going to use to do all this? Kieran asked with a grin. Yes, I did, Grace replied calmly. That's where you don't want to go. I'll go to my lover, Kieran said angrily. Why your lover? I explained the situation to you. No one there was my lover. And then I am a married woman. What claims can there be against me? I have a family, a child. I put that above all gossip. That's when I took offense and left. And now I have grown out of these petty grudges so I can go to work there again. Grace continued. But I'll tell you right away, it's hard work. And no one gets paid money for nothing. Sometimes, and on weekends are loaded. Sometimes you have to work late at regular working hours. In short, it's all spelled out in the labor contract. I tell you about all this at once, so that then there were no claims against me. Why did you decide this on your own? And you're just putting me on the spot. It's a family matter, so we have to decide it together, Kieran answered calmly. We are, Grace replied. But you've left me no choice. Someone has to take financial responsibility for the family. Is this your way of pushing me into this job? Is that what I'm offering you right now? I realize it's not your thing. It's useless to hold you accountable. So I'll go myself. Well, go, said Kieran. When you go out, most likely in a week you have to quit your old job and then. Kieran didn't talk about the subject again. And Grace had said all she wanted to say. She hadn't expected Kieran to say that. She'd have to do the work herself. If she gave up the idea, Kieran would realize that it was just scaremongering, manipulation. So he won't take her threats seriously. She would not want to meet with those who witnessed that shameful scandal when the wife of her lover came straight to the department, grabbed her by the hair, and hit her head against the table where she was sitting. She hit it with such force that a lump formed on her forehead and her nose bled. "If I ever see you at this table again," said the scandalized woman, "I will beat your bad head against the table until this table falls apart." Such shame and such scandal. Grace didn't know where to put her eyes from the gloating of those around her, so she couldn't take it anymore and quit. Now would she have to see all those faces again? Grace heard that Kieran had learned all the tricks. I guess this conversation had touched him after all. He was thinking, after all, she was glad of her husband's concern. It means she's not hopeless and she's on the right track. "Kieran, darling, can I give you a lift to work today?" Grace said at breakfast. "We'll go to my old job. I have to hand in my resignation letter. We'd better hurry. A good job won't wait long. As soon as it's available, it'll be taken. So take advantage of my kindness." Grace smiled and poked Kieran on the cheek. "I'll make it quick. You won't be late?" "Don't worry." "Wait, Grace, before you quit." Grace looked at her husband questioningly. "Can you wait for 2 days?" Kieran asked. "Why?" "I don't get it, Grace." "Wait for what, Kieran?" "To wait for the seat I'm counting on to be filled. Miss out and regret it." "No, Kieran, I can't take that risk. Eugene promised me a spot. Maybe it'll work out. And if it doesn't, Eugene won't help me, and I'll lose the job." "No, Kieran, they gave me a week to do everything. That place Eugene's promising, is the pay really good?" Grace asked with doubt in her voice. "Yes, it's good, 1.5 times my salary, but it'll have to wait. But if Eugene doesn't work out, then I'll take that job of yours. You're afraid of gossip. What if Eugene doesn't work out? And you don't think I'll have time to register?" "I can't take that risk, Kieran. It's not every day you get a job like this. I give you my word, I'll go if it doesn't work out with Eugene. If Grace, you know, if I've given my word, it's my word. It's my word. So you don't have to worry. Vincent's going to have a high-end daycare center." "Thank you, darling." Grace rushed over to kiss Kieran. "Once again, I was convinced I'd chosen the right husband. How lucky I am to have you. Right here, Kieran. It scares me when people envy me what a wonderful husband I have." Grace was afraid of jinxing the situation. Knowing Kieran, she still hoped that he would take financial responsibility for the family. Would he really be satisfied with a salary less than hers? Grace would certainly be happy for Eugene to find Kieran a job. According to Kieran, the pay there is even higher than what Grace was promised. And then there's no malcontents there who'd want to tell Kieran the truth. "I don't care about them, let them talk." She'd get out of it. Kieran would believe her, not these envious people who did nothing but envy her. Eugene couldn't get a job for Kieran, so having given his word to his wife, Kieran had to go to work where Grace had gotten a bad name. He didn't realize that he would find out the details of his wife's liaisons with her boss and the other employees of that business so quickly. It wasn't that he'd been deliberately inquiring. It had all spilled out on its own. Kieran even liked the work interesting, promising, and he gave himself to it completely, for which he received a decent salary and even bonuses. No, of course, not immediately he found out about everything. He worked quietly until some personalities did not realize that he was the husband of the very Grace, who, seeking the best place for herself, jumped from one bed to another. It turns out that she boldly took advantage of men who promoted her career. And then she did not squander the attention of customers with whom she worked, and for the good of the company traveled to foreign resorts with these customers. It was a shock to Kieran. Who was he living with? A whore. That's why she's pulling his heart out. She's used to living the high life, and he, a simple guy, fell naively into the clutches of a predator. Grace had never seen Kieran so drunk. He couldn't speak a word. She could tell from his rambling speech that he'd found out. She didn't care what he'd been told. The next day, when Kieran sobered up, she would refute all these rumors and gossip. After all, who would he believe, her or those who had once envied her? Her, of course. She's his wife. And then there's the whole pre-marriage thing. As Kieran's wife, she never cheated on him. She just didn't have time for it. She molded her husband into the kind of man she thought he should be. Coming home from work in such an inebriated state, Kieran spoke his mind as best he could and collapsed on the bed without undressing. Grace didn't take off his clothes out of principle. He'll wake up. He'll be ashamed of himself for stooping to this, she thought. Kieran was wheezing, and he stank of booze. So Grace retired from the bedroom to the living room couch. She couldn't sleep for a long time, preparing an exculpatory speech to her husband. And then she had to keep him from doing something rash, or God forbid, he would think of quitting. To the children's and youth sports school, she turned to her son. Set the table for breakfast. Go wake up Daddy. It's time to have breakfast and get ready for work. About 3 minutes later, Vincent returned with the words, Daddy doesn't want to get up. He's lying on the floor. I wake him up, but he won't get up. Well, I've got to go bow at his feet. Grace was angry. But she realized that anger was not her best counselor today. Today she must be patient, not to quarrel with her husband, but to convince him of her innocence. She must tell him he was right. Envious people are bad. That's what envy brings people to gossip. Nasty gossip, she decided. Walking into the bedroom, Grace said, Kieran, get up for work. It's time. Kieran was lying on the floor beside the bed. It was strange. He was lying on his back with his arms and legs spread. His face is very calm, his eyes are open, and it looks like he's... Kieran. Grace shouted and turned to her husband. Walking into her sister's room to share the good news, Chris was stunned. Her boyfriend had popped out of her sister's bedroom. Why are you always so lucky? Emma looked enviously at her older sister, who was trying on a wedding dress in front of the mirror. You're marrying the most handsome guy in town. Maybe we'll go to your wedding soon. Chris turned to her sister. Gene Thompson has his eyes on you, and you don't even pay attention to him. He's a good guy, a hard worker. He's helping his father build his house, keeps an eye on his little brothers. It's obvious that he'll make a good husband and father. Oh, come on, Emma said. You can't move him. He'll just live in the city and work as a truck driver all his life. I want to go to New York after high school. I'm sure I'll find a promising fiancé there. Maggie, the girl's mother, came into the room. She said the word promising. What does it mean? Emma frowned. Well, Mom, don't you get it? It's a man who aspires to become rich, successful, and even powerful. Does that mean we're all unpromising? Maggie laughed. My father works on a tractor. I carry the mail. Chris went to college and now teaches little kids to read and write. What about us? Emma said nothing, shook her head and ran out of the house. She's young, Maggie sighed. The wind is in her head. Nothing. Life will teach her. Well, bride, she turned to her eldest daughter. We're a week away from the wedding, and we've got a lot to do. We have to butcher a piglet for meat, pluck chickens, and also make sure my father doesn't try the moonshine before he's ready. I know him. She turned and left the room, closing the door behind her. Yes, in a week, I'll be not just a bride, but a wife, said Chris. She carefully hung the wedding dress on the rack and put it in the closet. Oh, I'm so happy. She twirled around the room and then sat down on the couch and thought. Chris had started dating Aiden when she started working at the village school. They knew each other before that, of course, because they lived in the same town and went to the same school. Aiden then dated Lexi Smith, who even saw him off to the army and promised to wait for him. Only her parents were against her marrying Aiden. They moved to another town and took their daughter with them without leaving an address. To be honest, Aiden hadn't really worried about it when he came back from the army. There were plenty of pretty girls in town. And he's a good-looking guy. He's not going to be alone. He got a job on a farm, driving milk to town. He made a good living with an extra income, lived with his elderly mother, and he was in no hurry to get married. Chris, or rather Chris Nick, he saw on September 1st, when he took his nephew to first grade. Aiden's older sister was in the maternity hospital at the time, giving birth to her third child. Her husband, Alex, had been sent to town for parts, and her mother was sick after a long day's work, and her legs were swollen. Aiden had to drive Jaden to school himself. Chris took an instant liking to Aiden. She was dressed in a strict business suit, and she was trying to keep herself as solid as an elementary school teacher should. But it was obvious that she was very nervous. Aiden liked her slim figure, her beautiful legs and eyes. She was different from the other girls in town. He began to pass by the school more and more often, if time allowed, and saw in the window how Chris Nick was teaching a lesson, passionately telling something, and the students were listening to her attentively. Did you have a crush on Watson? His mother asked him once. I see you're not a fool. Watson is a good girl, educated and hardworking. Her mother Mary boasts of her daughter Mealy. She says she's raised a good assistant, not like their youngest Emma. Her mother waved her hand. She's useless. She won't know how she'll finish school. She doesn't want to study at all, only disgraces her sister. I don't know when she'll get smart. Oh, son, if you'd gotten married, we'd probably have kids. She'd make a better wife, her mother said of Chris. I'll marry her, Aiden laughed. You're right, mother. It's time for me to start a family. Freedom is a drag. I'll just keep picking up girls. Aiden met Chris several times when she left school and walked her home. Then he asked her to the movies, and a month later he asked her to marry him. To his surprise, Chris agreed and even admitted that she liked him for a long time, when they were in school. In a week, she would become his lawfully wedded wife and move in with her husband. Chris got up from the couch and did the usual household chores. Her mother returned from the yard, her father came home from work, and Emma wasn't home again until late afternoon. However, everyone was used to it and sat down to dinner without her. The wedding was fun, only Chris was a little embarrassed. She was not used to such attention to herself, and when they shouted bitter, she shamefully covered herself with a veil. Aiden, on the contrary, was happy when drunken guests forced the bride and groom to kiss in public and gently pressed Chris to himself, trying to make the kiss last as long as possible. Emma frowned and envied her older sister again, thinking that she was unworthy of a guy like Aiden Wright. And when the young people were escorted into the house where they were to spend their wedding night, she ran away to the river bank and cried there for a long time, saying angrily, "It's all right. I'll prove it to you all." What and to whom Emma would prove, she herself did not yet understand, but she knew only one thing: that Chris would soon be desperately jealous of her too. Her mother-in-law accepted her daughter-in-law well, and even began to call her daughter. But Mary was still looking at her son-in-law, and he rarely visited her mother-in-law and father-in-law, meeting with them only on big holidays. Emma was always at home on such days, trying to sit close to Aidan at the table. But he paid no attention to her, considering her the youngest, as she was now called. After graduating from high school, Emma received a certificate with only C's in all subjects and wondered what she should do next. She would not be accepted to an institute or technical school with such marks, and she did not want to stay in the city. "What do you think?" Her friend Annie Simpson once asked her. "Go into hairdressing, you'll always have money. You said yourself that as a child you liked to cut your dolls, and once you cut Chris's hair while she was sleeping." Yeah, Emma laughed. "I did. My mother toweled me off so hard I couldn't sit up, and Chris cried and hid in the barn. She wore a scarf on her head for 3 months. They say they even provide dormitory accommodation for non-residents after they enter the school," Annie continued to insist. "So you don't have to worry about housing, and they pay a stipend, and there, and then, and then. You can work part-time. It's a wonderful life. Better than living in the city and working on a farm." "Why?" Emma jumped at the idea. "Then we could get a job at a salon and do fancy hairstyles." She dreamed, "I've seen such high hairstyles in a magazine." "How did you decide?" "I'm going to be a hairdresser," she announced. To the surprise of her parents and Emma herself, after accepting the documents at the school and passing the entrance exams, she was enrolled in the first course in the specialty of hairdressing. Studying was to be only 1 year and 10 months. But Emma almost did not expel after the first semester for failure, because she decided that just like in school, she will rarely attend classes, and teachers will still put her grades, even if 3, so as not to spoil the statistics. But in the school was all different, so Emma had to urgently pass all credits and more responsible attitude to study. Aidan came to the dormitory once every 2 weeks to give Emma groceries and a small amount of money, which Maggie sent to her, taking care of her youngest daughter. She wrote in the note that Emma should not waste the money, save up, or her life might turn out differently. But Emma went straight to the store and bought herself a new lipstick, inexpensive jewelry, and if she was lucky, a new blouse. She didn't think about the future. She tried to live here and now, and her mother would send her money. She didn't come to town anymore. She was bored there, but she plunged headlong into city life. There were new girlfriends with whom Emma went to the movies or to the disco, and guys were paying attention to her. Only they were newcomers like her, and Emma called them by a word she liked very much: unpromising. She even managed to get one of them pregnant. But she didn't hesitate long, took a referral from the hospital and got rid of the unwanted child. Grieve about it did not become, and special conclusions for themselves did not make, because just 6 months later visited the hospital again. But Chris, unlike her younger sister, was very worried that she and her husband still had no children. They had been living together for 2 years, and every month Chris waited with hope that now it would turn out that she was expecting a child. But alas, time passed, and the long-awaited pregnancy did not come. Aidan and all the family, as they could, reassured Chris. But she saw that her husband and mother-in-law and parents are looking forward to the firstborn, but could not please them yet. She and Aidan had gone through a full examination and all the tests. They said that Chris and her husband were completely healthy and advised to wait a little longer and then take some drastic measures. Mother-in-law advised Chris to go to a witch doctor living in a neighboring town. Allegedly, she helped many people in women's issues. But Chris continued to hope that even without magical influence will soon be able to become a mom. One weekend, Emma came home to pick up some things. She had already graduated from college, had a job at a men's barber shop, and was sharing a small apartment with a friend. She needed a pillow, blankets, linens, and some dishes. These she wanted to ask her mother for so she wouldn't have to spend extra money to buy the necessities. As she hugged her younger sister, Chris complained that she couldn't get pregnant, and she was afraid that Aiden might leave her because of it. "I wish I had your problems," Emma sighed. "You've got a lot to be sad about. The diapers, the cradles, the sleepless nights. What do you need it for? You've got so many kids in your class. Don't you get tired of teaching and raising them every day?" "You don't understand," Chris looked at her sister reproachfully. "Your own baby. It's a part of you, your blood daughter. When you become a mom, you'll find out for yourself." "And what else?" Emma shrugged her shoulders. "Am I going to ruin my life for the sake of a screaming child? I want to live brightly, to dress nicely, to go out to restaurants, not to stand around the crib and cook porridge for days and nights." "That's silly," Chris sighed. "You're thinking about the wrong thing. When you have a family, you'll talk differently. Do you have anyone in mind? You could bring them to us, introduce them to us." "It's nothing serious," Emma said. "I got a job at a men's barber shop on purpose. I thought I'd meet someone there. But in the end, only pensioners and school children come to get their hair cut. I should choose a better salon, go to work there. They have a better crowd." In the morning, Aiden drove Emma into town with all the things she'd packed and what her mother had given her. Even the beautiful curtains she'd taken out of her trunk, which she'd saved for a special occasion. "You need them more in town," she said to her daughter. "I don't know who will come to visit, so you won't be ashamed in front of people. I'll buy some fabric at the store and sew something for the kitchen. You go behind the curtains and look for napkins for the table," her mother said. "When Aiden goes to town next time, he will bring everything for you." After that, Emma never came to the village again. Aiden started coming home from town later and later. Chris was worried, and often went outside the gate, staring into the distance. Aiden's explanation for his late return was that his car had broken down, that he'd been offered a little extra work, or that he was so tired that he'd stopped on the side of the road and rested a little. Chris believed her husband, felt sorry for him, and could not even think that he deceived her. One day, Chris was called into town for a meeting of elementary school teachers. She felt bad from the morning, dizzy and nauseous, but Chris could not go. As soon as she left the City Department of Public Education, she was dizzy again, and she lost consciousness. She woke up in the ambulance that was taking her to the hospital. "What's wrong with me?" she whispered with just her lips. "I'm dying." "Well, honey, we will not let you die," laughed the woman in a white coat. "But we can't make a diagnosis yet. In the hospital, you will find out everything." In the emergency room, Chris took tests and was sent to the examination room, from which she came out, not believing what she had just been told. "Oh my God," she covered her face with her hands. "I can't be pregnant." She was offered to stay at the hospital for more tests, but Chris refused. She knew she would be worried at home because of her absence, so she hurried to the bus station. But as soon as she reached it, she saw that the last bus heading in her direction had already disappeared around the corner, leaving behind smoke from the exhaust pipe. What to do? Chris looked around, hoping to find someone she knew, but the bus station was empty. Well, she'd have to spend the night at Emma's. "I'll go home tomorrow morning," she thought, and walked to the bus stop. As Chris neared the house where her younger sister Emma lived, she saw the truck labeled Milk where Aiden worked. "Oh, that's how great it is." Chris got excited and picked up her pace. Aiden must have stopped at Emma's for dinner or tea on the way. And now he and I are going home together. Lucky me, I'll give them both a good time to hear the news. As for the baby, Aiden Smith would soon be a father, and Emma would have a nephew or niece. Reaching the right floor, Chris pressed the bell button. "Who's there?" She heard her sister's disgruntled voice. The neighbor needed something again. The door swung open, and Emma appeared on the doorstep in a short, transparent robe. "Is that you?" Confused, she asked when she saw Chris. "Hi, sis," she exclaimed happily. "You didn't expect to see me. I came for a meeting. And then, well, I'll tell you later. Why do you keep me on the doorstep? Let me through." "We told you that." Emma smirked, blocking the entrance to the apartment. "Why don't you come over tomorrow?" "What are you doing?" Chris was surprised. "I'll be in the village tomorrow. What's wrong with you?" She looked anxiously at her sister, who was very pale. "Isn't she ill?" "Yes," Emma nodded hastily. "You know, there's a virus going around. I'm afraid you'll catch it. You go home, and when I get better, I'll come to you myself." "Honey, who are you talking to for so long?" Chris heard the gentle voice of her husband. "Let's go to bed. I'm waiting for you, or I'll have to go home soon." "What?" Chris pushed Emma away and headed into the room with determination. Seeing his wife, Aiden covered himself with a blanket and was afraid to even look out. "What's that?" Chris turned to her sister. "What is my husband doing in your bed?" "Well, now that you've found out," Emma sat back in her chair with her foot on the leg, "there's no reason to hide. Get out and get dressed," she shouted at Aiden. "The three of us can talk about this, since you couldn't tell Chris," Emma said. "I have nothing to say to you." Chris turned and walked toward the exit. "Wait," Emma grabbed her arm. "I want to tell you that Aiden and I are having a baby. You still haven't been able to give him a baby." "I get it," Chris said, then bit her lower lip. "Well, so be it. Know that not only do I now have no husband, but no sister." She opened the door and quickly walked out of the apartment. Chris walked down the street, unable to see anything from crying. She almost got hit by a car as she crossed the road. "Chris." Adrian, the driver who was driving the chairman, jumped out of the car. "I almost ran you over." "What happened?" He saw tears in her eyes. "Did someone die?" "Yes," Chris nodded her head. "Yes, they did." "You get in." "Get in," Adrian fidgeted, swinging open the front door of the car. "I'm on my way back from the train station to drop off Alex and his wife Maggie. They were on vacation at the resort. I wanted to stop by a friend's house. He lives here in town. I thought I'd drive back to the village tonight and then in the morning." "Well, if that's the case, we'll go there right away." "So who died here? Was it Father Nick? I thought I saw him this morning. He was in good health." "No, not Father." Chris shook her head tiredly. "Maggie's mother." Adrian almost let go of the steering wheel. "How sad," he exclaimed. "My husband and my sister are dead," Chris cried. "Dead to me," she said. They drove the rest of the way in silence. The whole village was buzzing like an alarmed beehive. When Chris learned that Aiden Smith had become involved with Emma Watson and was expecting a child with her, she told only her mother Maggie and asked her not to tell anyone. But Maggie could not resist, shared the news with her neighbor, and she told everyone else. Everyone discussed Aiden Smith with Emma Watson and felt sorry for Chris, whom they respected very much. Chris took her things and went to live at her parents' house, and Aiden, returning to the village in the morning, wrote a letter of resignation. He turned in his truck, got his paycheck the same day, and took the last bus back to town. Maggie tried to talk to him, to talk some sense into him, but he only waved her away, telling her to stay out of his life. He'd figure it out on his own. Chris didn't leave the house for a week. Good thing school was out. It was vacation time. Maggie was worried about her daughter, afraid she'd do something to herself. But one evening, Chris walked into the kitchen. At the table just sat her mother and Father Nick, and raising her head proudly said, No matter what happens, I have something to live for. Mom, Dad, you don't know this yet, but I'm expecting a baby. I'm going to raise it on my own. I hope you'll help me. And please don't mention my ex-husband or my ex-sister's name in this house again. And if Emma shows up here, I will leave this house. Oh, my daughter. Maggie went to Chris. What a joy. She turned to her husband. Why are you sitting there? Go hug your daughter, as, after all, soon to be a grandfather. You this, daughter, Nick ineptly hugged Chris. You can always count on us. And I'm not letting Emma on my doorstep. She's disgraced us all over the village, the whore. He swore harshly. Aiden and Emma never came back to the village, and there was no news of them. Maggie wanted to go into town to find out anything about the prodigal daughter. But as soon as she mentioned it to her husband, Nick looked at her so much that it became clear to her that it was better not to meet with the youngest daughter at all. Chris's pregnancy went well. She went to work until the birth and helped her mother in the household. And in due time, Chris gave birth to a daughter, which she named Marina. Grandmother and grandfather did not dote on our granddaughter. They got up to her at night so that Chris could sleep. Maggie even quit her job as a letter carrier to look after the girl. And Chris was already back at work on September 1st. After school, she was just in the teacher's lounge when a young man walked in and politely greeted everyone, introduced himself as Michael, and announced that he would be teaching high school history and geography. The young teachers immediately took out their mirrors, fixed their hairstyles, and painted their lips, while the others looked at the new teacher with interest and nodded approvingly. The situation is just like in the movie Big Break. Teacher Jessica whispered to Chris. Remember, Nestor was also the only man in the girls' group. No, I haven't seen that movie, Chris shrugged. That's too bad, Jessica sighed. There's a lot to learn from the current generation of educators. Chris shrugged again and looked at her watch. It was time to go and feed Marina. Excuse me, can you tell me how to get to the post office? She heard a man's voice behind her. Chris turned around and saw Michael, who was looking at her, smiling. Come on, I'll walk you out, she said. I'm on my way. On the way they talked, and Chris learned that Michael came to work in their village for a reason. In the city he has an ex-wife, and most importantly a daughter, Emily, whom he misses very much. So why did you leave them? Chris wondered. Would have stayed in the city and met with his daughter. The proverbial housing issue, Michael grinned. After the divorce, I left the apartment to my wife, and I lived with one friend, then another, then my parents. When my ex-wife got an apartment from the state, where my daughter lives now, I found out that your school needed a teacher. And I came here. So I came here. I've already been assigned a house, and I'm trying to get settled in. Here's the post office. Chris pointed to the blue-painted doors. Over there is the library. She pointed to the brick building again. There's also the clubhouse where our young people hang out. And once a week on weekends you can watch a movie. I'll definitely check out the library, Michael nodded. When I lived in the orphanage, I spent a lot of time reading books. I even got the nickname the bookseller for that. I especially liked history and travel books. I remember literally reading Robinson Crusoe, The Mysterious Island, Captain Grant's Children. Oh, I always liked those books too. Chris rejoiced. My mom used to get mad at me because I'd cover myself with a blanket, turn on a flashlight, and read all night until dawn. You know, she looked at Michael. You should come and visit us. You don't know anyone here, and I'll introduce you to my parents and my daughter. She's just a little girl, though. Do you have a daughter? Michael asked with interest and immediately became sad. Thank you for the invitation, but I'm not comfortable. I didn't have time to come here, and now I'm asking for a visit. This isn't the city. Chris got mad. We keep things simple. A new person in the village, you have to invite him to visit, feed him, Ask him questions, and if necessary, help him. There's our house. Chris pointed to the green fence at the end of the street. Daddy painted it himself. No one else has one like it. Thank you, Michael said again. He said goodbye and went into the building where the post office was. You know we have a new teacher at school. Chris literally ran into the house. A man. He's had some kind of family tragedy. So he came to our village. Wait, don't touch that. Maggie frowned. Better feed the baby. Can't you hear Marina crying? She must be hungry. Now, Chris quickly washed her hands and took her daughter in her arms. Well, why did you scream, my beauty? Chris said affectionately. Now Mommy will feed you and you will calm down. After feeding, Chris put her daughter back in the crib, and she fell asleep immediately. Maggie put a plate of food in front of Chris. Who did you have at school? Chris told about Michael. And at the end, she added, You know, I feel sorry for him. He's so lonely and his eyes are so sad. You can tell he's very worried about leaving town, and most importantly, his beloved daughter. So invite him to visit us. Maggie poured tea into a cup and sat down opposite her daughter. You know you should always support people, especially those who need it. Who knows what's on your Michael's mind? Why don't you let him come over tomorrow night? I'll bake some pies. Get some from the cellar. He's probably got nothing to eat at home. Maybe I could help him with his chores. We should clean the house, mop the floors. Why didn't you find out right away? I didn't think about it. Chris lowered her head. You see, Maggie nodded. It's good that you have a mother. Someone to think about it. From the orphanage, you say? She wondered. Oh, to know I've never seen a mother's affection. And why such a punishment for a good man? She took an empty bucket from the bench and went out into the yard. Mom's right, Chris thought as she finished her tea. How could she not have offered to help right away? And she'll think we're all indifferent. The next day, Chris was still hesitant to ask Michael to come over. Only when the two of them were alone in the teacher's lounge after class did she dare. I told my parents about you yesterday, and they are inviting you to visit. My mom has already put the dough for the pies this morning to treat you. So we're waiting for you tonight. Chris exhaled with relief. I can't say no to pies, Michael laughed. I'll be sure to stop by. Thanks for the invitation. When she had finished her chores, Chris began to set the table. She laid the tablecloth and took out the table set, which her mother had taken great care to display only on special occasions. It's just like preparing the groom's party, Maggie joked. I've had enough of fiancés. Chris sighed heavily. I'm not going to get married again. I've had enough once. Don't be so sure, Maggie shook her head. You're still young. Anything can happen in life. As they say, fate will find you behind the stove. Chris wanted to answer her mother, but saw through the window as the gate opened, and Michael entered the yard. Oh, he came, and I have not had time to change, exclaimed Chris. Good evening, Michael said politely, entering the room and handing Maggie a box of chocolates. Come to the table, she said, a little embarrassed. John, why are you standing there? Come on, give your dear guest a treat, Maggie said to her husband. John fussed. Michael, will you try my cherry liqueur or my moonshine? Oh, this is some fine moonshine I've made. Clear as a tear. I don't really drink, Michael started to refuse. But you should respect the hospitality of your hosts, so I think I'll try some of your liqueur. Good. John was happy and poured the drink. Maggie began to take care of the guest. Don't be shy, we keep things simple. Michael ate the pies and praised them. But most of all, he liked boiled potatoes with pickles. After drinking Naluka, he relaxed a little and began to talk about his life and why he came to work in the village. I never knew my parents. My mother abandoned me in the maternity hospital, so first I was in a baby home, and then I was transferred to an orphanage, said Michael sadly. I had a grandmother who lived in the village. She was old, and they wouldn't let her take custody of me. But Maggie used to come to the orphanage 2 or 3 times a year, bringing me gifts and crying, stroking my head with her wrinkled hand. And then she stopped coming at all. She must have died. And where she is buried, I don't even know where to go to her grave. I did well at school. I especially liked geography, and I dreamed of visiting different countries. I also wanted to become a teacher. Therefore, after receiving my school leaving certificate, I applied to the Pedagogical Institute. While studying, I lived in a dormitory. And then I was told that as a pupil of an orphanage, the state should provide me with an apartment. It took me a long time to get it. I went to various instances. The director of the school where I got a job after graduation helped me. He had a friend who worked in the administration. Thanks to him, I got a 1-room apartment. True, it needed repairs, but I was not afraid of that. My friends from the orphanage helped me, and I still keep in touch with them. Then I met Emily. She worked as a saleswoman in a bookstore, where I liked to often look. 6 months later, we got married, and 9 months later, our daughter Lisa was born. After her maternity leave, Emily went back to work, and then she was offered a transfer to a jewelry store. From that moment on, she began to change literally in front of my eyes. Emily began to reproach me that I do not earn enough, that it is necessary to change the apartment for a bigger one, because my daughter will grow up and she needs a separate room. And what could I do on a teacher's salary? I tried my best. I took extra lessons, class management, tutoring. I came home late, but I had time to play with my daughter and help my wife with household chores. And she still wasn't happy with me. And then Emily said she was leaving me for another, richer and more successful man. I persuaded her to stay, but she was adamant, saying that she was tired of the poor life and that she wants to dress well and fashionably, travel and dine in restaurants. So I let her go, only asking that she let me see my daughter. She herself suggested that Lisa live with me for a while so as not to traumatize the child's psyche. I didn't object. Emily packed her things and went to live with her new chosen one. She rarely saw her daughter now, and when she came, she told me how well her life was going. She bragged about her new outfits. After she left, Lisa cried and said she wanted to go to her mom. I comforted her as best I could, but I couldn't help her. A year later, Emily came back to us. I didn't question her about anything. I forgave her for my daughter's sake, and we went back to being a family. But 6 months ago, I found out that Emily had started seeing a man again, even though she assured me it was nothing like that. I was so disgusted that she was lying to me again. I packed my things now. At first, I lived with friends, and when school was over, I quit my job and came here. I miss my daughter very much, of course. She can already read. And yesterday I sent her a letter in which I wrote that I love her very much, and I will definitely come to visit her soon. I remember how Lisa missed her mom, her bitter sobs. And that's why I couldn't let her stay with me again, while Emily would again organize her personal life. I'd rather have Lisa live with Mom, and I'd take her here in the country for summer vacation. Yes, Nick sighed. He poured moonshine into a shot glass and drank it in a gulp. Maggie was silent for a while, and then spoke again. "Why do you eat so badly, Alex?" She moved a plate with homemade sausage to him. "I'll put the samovar on now. We'll drink tea with jam. I have such delicious jam made of paradise apples. I made it myself this year." "Oh, it's been a long time since I've had such a delicious meal." He leaned back in his chair. "Thank you for the treat." After a short conversation, Alex started to go home. Chris came out to see him off. "What nice and hospitable parents you have. Does your daughter look a lot like you?" He stopped at the gate. "Excuse me for an indiscreet question. Are you married?" "No," Chris replied sharply. "I was married, but it didn't work out, and I don't want to discuss it." "I'm sorry," Alex repeated guiltily. "Good night." He turned around and walked quickly down the dark country street, holding the bag of pies that the caring Maggie had handed him. How unlucky for the man. Maggie sighed as she cleared the table. "Archel's right. You can tell he's a good man, but he's unlucky with his wife. I wish you had a husband like that, Chris." She turned to her daughter. "I already told you that I do not need anyone," she replied with irritation. "We don't know how long he'll be with us. He will get tired of living in our village and will go back to the city." Chris did not invite Alex to visit her anymore, and at school she only nodded her head in greeting if they met in the teacher's lounge. In the middle of the school year, Alex suddenly left for the city, and none of the teachers could understand what had happened to him. He said it was a family emergency. Mary, the headmistress, explained. I didn't question him further. His face was already blank. I think he got a telegram of some kind. "Yes, I brought him a telegram," confirmed Mealy, the postmistress. "And it said, 'Come right away. Emily's in the hospital, that's all. I don't know what happened to him.'" She waved her hands helplessly. Alex returned to the village 2 weeks later. He was accompanied by a girl of about 6, who held his hand tightly and looked around with frightened eyes. As they were walking home, they came across Maggie coming back from the store. "Did you bring your daughter to visit?" Maggie asked, looking at the girl. "Wow, she looks just like you. She looks just like you." No, Alex shook his head. He sighed. "Lisa will live with me forever now." "Did your ex-wife run away to another man again?" Maggie asked tactlessly. "That's what women are like." "Emily died," Alex answered briefly. "Let's go, I have to look at the kindergarten. Maybe they'll agree to look after Lisa while I'm at school." "Why do you need a daycare center?" Maggie took another look at the girl who was hiding behind her father's back. "You can bring your daughter to us. I'm at home with my granddaughter all day anyway, and I'll look after your girl. She'll be better off at our place than in the garden, where there are a lot of children without her." "I don't know," Alex mumbled uncertainly. "I don't feel comfortable burdening you." "Well, think about it." Maggie switched to you. "You brought a girl from the city to a village where she had never been before and didn't know anyone. So you want to leave her alone with strange children? You don't know how they'll treat her." "I hadn't thought of that," he frowned. "Thank you for offering to look after Lisa." "Don't worry, I'll pay you for it." "No way." Maggie was indignant. "I don't want to hear any more about it, so bring your daughter tomorrow morning. I think we'll find a common language with her." At home, Maggie told Chris that Alex had returned to the village not alone, but with his daughter, whom he would bring to them tomorrow morning. "Mom, can you handle 2 kids?" Chris asked worriedly. "Why wouldn't I be?" surprised Maggie. "Did I put you 2 on your feet? No one helped me. And I still had time to work and do chores." She stopped talking, thinking of her youngest daughter. No matter how angry she was at her, no matter how much she scolded her, she was still worried and concerned about her. One day, Maggie even asked Leon, the chairman's chauffeur, to stop by Catherine's house to see how she was doing. Leon stopped by and replied that there were other people living in the apartment, and they didn't know anything about Catherine. Greg also did not appear in the village, but it was said that he got a job at the depot, and now he delivers sand and rubble to construction sites. And whether he and Catherine lived together or not, no one knew. The next morning, Alex really brought Lisa to Maggie. The girl did not want to let go of her father's hand, looking fearfully at strangers. "Have you ever seen a live piglet?" Maggie tried to distract her. "Come on, I'll show it to you. And we have a cockerel and hens. They're in the hen house now. It's cold outside, so we don't let them out. Maybe they've already laid their eggs. Will you help me collect them? Shall we go? She gave Lisa her hand. It's time for your daddy to go to work, or he'll be late for class and the principal will scold him. Lisa looked at her father, who nodded approvingly, and hesitantly put her hand in Maggie's. Well, that's good, rejoiced the latter, and we'll bake pancakes on the stove and boil porridge. What do you like best, buckwheat or wheat? Maggie led the girl to the henhouse and waved to Alex to go away. Chris came out onto the porch and, seeing her colleague, stopped in confusion. Vera Nikolaevna, he rejoiced. Are you going to work too? He looked at his watch. Perhaps we should hurry up, or we might actually be late for the start of classes. After class, Chris and Alex walked together again toward Maggie's house on the snow-covered country road. They were not in a hurry now, enjoying the silence and the frosty weather. What did your wife die of? Chris suddenly asked. Was she sick with something? Alex sighed and, after a little silence, answered. She was in a car accident. The man she was in the car with was alive, and Emily was in intensive care for a week. Doctors, as best they could, fought for her life, but alas, nothing could be done. The injuries were too severe. I'm so sorry, Chris whispered. Your daughter is without a mom. I grew up without a mother myself, and I know what it's like. He sighed again. So I'm going to try to replace her with Lisa. As much as I can. You'll probably go back to the city now, Chris suggested, and our school will be without a geography and history teacher again. No, we won't go back to the city. Alex shook his head. We have no relatives there, and friends and acquaintances have their own families, their own worries. And I liked it in your village. People are very kind and helpful. It's rare to find such people in the city nowadays. Our people are really good, confirmed Chris, both in sorrow and in joy, always together, always helping each other. I've already seen that he supported Chris, who slipped on the slippery road. All my life I have lacked family and close people who could take care of me a little bit, something to advise me. Tell us, please, how did you live in the orphanage? It must have been hard, Chris asked. I don't even want to remember about that time. Alex sighed heavily. We had everything, a roof over our heads, food, shoes, clothes. But I always envied those kids who had parents, at least a mom or dad. We attended a regular school and studied in a class with homeschooled children. That's what we called them. They, of course, were different from the orphans. They were freer in their choice of entertainment, friends, and even food. They did not have to get up early on weekends, do exercises, and rush to the canteen to have time to take a seat at the table. They had the love of their relatives, and in my soul only resentment and anger. I always ask myself a question: why am I worse than them? Why did I grow up without a mother and father? What was my fault when my own mother left me in the maternity hospital and ran away? And I always waited for my mother to come to her senses, to come and take me home. But as time went on, no one ever came for me. Have you tried to find your mother? Chris asked cautiously. I found her. Alex nodded his head. My grandmother, when she came to visit me at the orphanage, told me about her, calling her for some reason without a byline. I remembered my mother's last name, first name, middle name, but the year of birth did not fit in my head, so I had to look for her a little longer. But I got lucky. And you're in touch with her now? Chris looked at him with interest. We haven't even met. Alex looked away. Or rather, I came to her address. She lives in the neighboring region. And I found out that my mother has 3 more children, 2 daughters and a son, that their family lives amicably. My mother loves her children very much and takes care of them. And she did not even tell anyone about my existence. I learned all this from elderly women who lived in the same building. At first I wanted to go up to the apartment and look into the eyes of the woman who had abandoned me as a baby. I wanted to ask her why she had done me such an injustice. And then I decided that we should not meet, let her live as she did surrounded by her beloved children. She and I are total strangers to each other. And even if we met, it wouldn't change anything about our relationship. Well, that's not fair, Chris even jumped up. How could she live with a clear conscience, knowing that she had once left a small child literally at the mercy of fate? I don't want to condemn or justify her. Alex stopped next to Chris. Maybe she had a difficult life situation and she couldn't do otherwise. You are a kind person. Chris opened the gate and entered the yard. You know how to forgive. And I still hate my little sister Mealy because she... Chris didn't have time to finish, because as soon as she entered the house, the dog Jessie rushed to Alex. And she quickly chattered. Daddy, Daddy. Me and Grandma Maggie made pancakes together. They were so good. We saved some for you. And Grandma Maggie let me pet the pig. He's so little, and he's grunting. And Grandpa Nick promised me a ride on the big tractor. And there's a little girl named Jessica who I even got to play with a little. I see you got along with everyone, Alex laughed. I hope you behaved well. They won't complain about you? No way. Maggie waved her hands. Jessica helped me. I even put Jessica to bed myself. What do you mean? Chris was surprised. Usually you have to rock her in your arms. Oh. Jessica has a way with a girl, Maggie smiled. She sat down beside the crib and began to tell her a story. She listened and fell asleep. That's what it means children always understand each other. No matter how much Alex refused, Maggie still persuaded him to sit down at the table. She put a bowl of fresh soup in front of him and then served him some pancakes. At the same time, Chris was talking to Jessica and was surprised to find out that the girl was developing beyond her years. She could read, write, and count. And Jessica said that all this was taught to her by her daddy, whom she loves very much. Now 5 days a week Jessica spent at the Watsons. And on Saturdays and Sundays Andrew took care of his daughter. He again offered Maggie money for looking after the girl, but she even resented him. Well, I do not have an extra bowl of soup or porridge for the child. Then Alex, before taking Jessica home, went to the village store. He bought honey gingerbread, which Maggie loved, or halva, or even chocolate candies. She couldn't refuse such gifts, though she grumbled. Why do you spend money on this? I can drink with sugar. Spring passed. Summer and the long-awaited vacation came. Vera finished tidying up the classroom and, having returned home, found out that Alex and Jessica came to their house to say goodbye before the road. They're going into town, Maggie said. I told them you were at school, but they didn't have time to go there or they'd miss the bus. They were gone for good. Chris got kind of sad. Remember I told you he wouldn't be in the village for long? I wanted to ask, but I didn't dare. Maggie looked guiltily at her daughter. What do you care? Well, he's gone and gone. But the students are left without a teacher again. Well, they can invite a new one. Chris nodded and went about her chores. But still she kept thinking about Alex, who wouldn't leave her mind. The next day she met Mary in the school corridor, who was on her way to her office. Excuse me, but I'd like to ask you something, Chris said in a quiet voice. And Mary stopped and looked at her in surprise. We won't have a geography and history teacher again in the new school year? Why, Chris, would you say that? Mary called all her teachers by you and first name, even though she had once taught. I haven't received Alex's letter of resignation. He's on vacation now and should be back to work at the end of August. But he left and took his daughter with him. Chris kept asking. If he had gone away for a few days, he could have left Jessica with us. I don't know what kind of business a man might have. Mary grinned. When he comes back, you can ask him about it then. Now, If you'll excuse me, I have some work to do. They're expecting a report from the town council. It was the middle of August. Alex and his daughter hadn't shown up in the village yet, but Aiden showed up and came to visit his mother. In the evening, he'd shown up at the Watsons' house drunk. Chris was the only one home. Maggie was at the neighbor's house, and Nick hadn't come home from work. "Why didn't you tell me I had a daughter?" Aiden looked at Chris with anger. "Or do you have something to hide from me?" "I wanted to tell you," Chris grinned, "but you were so into my little sister Emma, who was also pregnant. With you." "So who did you have, a son or a daughter?" Aiden looked away. "A son. Congratulations on your heir." Chris grinned again. "You and Emma must be very happy." "What do you want from me? Why are you here? Are you still my wife?" Aiden said uncertainly. "We're not divorced, are we? Why don't we try living together again? And we have a daughter now. How will she grow up without a father?" "What about Emma?" Chris squinted. "You're living with two families, aren't you? You got a kid there too?" "Emma and I haven't lived together for a long time." Aiden sat down on a stool. "We broke up right after the birth of our son, whom she gave to the orphanage." "Gave him away where?" Chris asked. "Her own child? An orphanage?" "That can't be. Why would she want a sick child?" Aiden took a cigarette out of the pack to light it, but remembering, put it back. "The boy was born with some kind of abnormality. The doctors said we were going to have a hard time with him. So Emma decided to give up her son while he was still young. He'll be better cared for at the orphanage than his own mother. You know your sister, she doesn't think about anyone but herself." "How could you let her do that?" Chris paced nervously from side to side. "And after all this, you dare to come here and ask us to live together? It's like nothing happened. Get out of here and don't let me see you again." But Aiden got up from his stool and came toward her. "Get out," Chris shouted, pointing her hand toward the door. "And forget you have a daughter. I'll never let you see her again." "We'll see about that." Aiden kicked the stool, which fell to the floor with a clatter. "When I want to see her, I'll see her." "Who are you going to see?" Maggie came into the room and looked menacingly at her son-in-law. "What are you doing here? And drunk?" "I want to see my daughter." Aiden looked at his mother-in-law defiantly. "I didn't even know she was born. They hid that fact from me. I'm offering Chris a family again. And she's stupid, doesn't agree. You'd think someone else would have a baby." "I'm going to take a log and throw you off the porch," Maggie said firmly, moving toward Aiden. "You'll forget your way back to us in no time." "Yes, I gave you my trust." He took a swing at Maggie, but immediately grimaced in pain. Alex, who had entered the room at the same time, intercepted his arm and twisted it back hard. "Are you going to leave, or will they throw you out of the house like a puppy?" he asked Aiden sternly. "What kind of a man are you if you're going to lay a hand on a woman?" "Who are you?" Aiden raised his head, writhing in pain. Alex led Aiden out into the yard, brought him to the gate, and only then let go of his hand. "I used to do Sambo when I was young. So you don't want to mess with me," he told Aiden, and walked quickly back into the house. "Did you come for good or just to get your things and papers?" Maggie asked him. "And Sarah, she's grown so much over the summer. I didn't recognize her at first." "Of course she has grown up," Alex smiled. "She'll be starting school on September 1st. "Chris," he turned to her. "Will you take another student in your class? Such a capable one." "Of course I will," she smiled back. While Maggie was asking how Alex had spent the summer, Chris went outside and sat down on a bench. "You've been gone so long?" Mary began to speak. "I thought you weren't coming back to the village. Did you go on vacation?" "We went to my mother's," Alex answered after a little silence. "I thought about it for a long time, and decided to meet her to find out why she did that to me. "And you did?" Chris whispered. Yes, Alex nodded his head. It wasn't easy for both of us, but still I was able to find the strength to forgive my mother, who literally knelt in front of me and cried bitterly. I also met my sisters and brother, my nephews. So I have a big family now. They kept us home too long. Persuaded us to stay forever, to live all together. But I'm not ready for such a change in my life yet. Did you find out why your mother abandoned you when you were still a baby? Chris asked cautiously. As she told me when she was young, she was, as you might say, quite windy, easily falling in love with guys and easily breaking up with them, until one of them turned her head, Alex began. After a while, her mother got pregnant and was even very happy about it, thinking that her lover would marry her right away. But it turned out differently. He left her and never showed up again. It was too late to have an abortion. Then she returned to her mother, who constantly reproached her and was ashamed of her dissoluteness. And yet my grandmother did not refuse to help and was ready to help in the upbringing of her grandson. But my mother decided in her own way, having given birth to a child, that is, me, she refused him in the maternity hospital and went to live in another city. And she never remembered you? Chris was horrified. She says she did. Alex sighed, but she never tried to find me. She thought I was adopted by other parents and that everything was fine in my life. When she saw me on the doorstep of her apartment, she didn't even believe that I was her son. After all, it had been many years, Alex continued. Then we had a long talk with her. I told her about my life in the orphanage, about my grandmother, who sometimes visited me. My mother cried bitterly and constantly asked for forgiveness. She introduced me to her husband, my sisters and brother, not hiding from them that she had committed a great sin in her youth. To be honest, my sisters were very happy to have an older brother, and my little brother proudly declared that he wanted to be like me. I'm very happy for you, Chris said sincerely. Now you and Jessica have relatives, and you won't feel lonely. And the one who was rudely escorted out of the house, who do you belong to? Alex asked. Chris sighed. Husband, or rather, ex-husband. She told Alex everything that had happened recently in her life with Aiden. Yes, he stretched out, and after all that, he dares to show up at your door like that. But that's not all, she said, her head low. It turns out I have a nephew, only my sister put him in a boarding school because he was born with some kind of disease. I want to track down this kid and take him home with us. Maybe he can be cured with proper care and constant attention. You are a very good person, Alex looked at her with respect. I will try to help you. I still have some vacation days left. And tomorrow morning I'll go back to the city to collect information about your nephew. Only he hesitated. I'll have to stay with you for a few days. Chris nodded quickly and began to thank Alex for his help. He pulled a notebook out of his pocket and began writing down the information about Lexi and Aiden that Chris had told him. The next day, Alex took the first bus to town and returned from there a few days later. All this time, Chris and Maggie had been waiting impatiently for him. Chris and Maggie had already decided that they would definitely take the boy from the boarding school and take care of him. When Alex came into their house, they immediately rushed to him with questions. I have 2 pieces of news for you, he said tiredly, sinking down on a chair. Good and not so good. Which one should I start with? The good news, of course, Chris and Maggie exclaimed with one voice. I managed to find out which boarding school your nephew and grandson was in. He really has health problems. The doctors found a heart defect, and without surgery they gave no chance for him to live a full and long life. What's the other news? Chris asked with bated breath. Wasn't there? No? No, Alex waved his hands. Don't think anything bad, there's nothing wrong with the boy. Only he was adopted by foster parents who will be responsible for his treatment. They have both means and conditions for that. We have to take our grandson, Maggie said firmly. We don't want him to live with strangers when he has his own grandparents." "I'm afraid it won't work." Alex helplessly waved his hands. "They made all the necessary documents and took the child to another country. Maybe it's even better, because heart surgeries are very expensive. That means that your grandson has a good chance to live on." Lexi Maggie covered her face with her hands. "What have you done? How could you have the conscience to get rid of your own child? You should have brought her to us if you didn't want to raise her yourself." She got up from the chair and went into the other room. "Thank you so much for helping us find out about the nephew we'll never see." Chris looked at Alex with gratitude. "Without your help, it would have been much more difficult for us." On September 1st, the schoolyard was crowded as usual. Chris had lined up her first grade class and was now observing the students. Jessica stood serious in the white blouse and dark blue sundress that Maggie had ironed for her yesterday. Alex admired his daughter from afar and involuntarily shifted his gaze to Chris, who was nervous again, as if she was receiving her first graders for the first time. After lessons, just like a year ago, Chris and Alex left the school together, and Jessica ran to Grandma Maggie and Grandpa Nick to tell them how her first day of school had been. "To be honest, when I came here, I thought that I wouldn't stay here for a long time, and right after the end of the school year I would go back to the city," Alex said, looking at the blue sky, where white fluffy clouds were slowly floating. "And what do you think now?" Chris looked at him questioningly. "What has changed in your life?" "You know, I've never been as happy as I am now," he smiled. "I've met some wonderful people who have become like family to me. And most importantly," he was silent for a moment, "I met you and fell in love. Perhaps for the first time in my life." "I like you very much, too," Chris said, embarrassed. "But you know I have a daughter." "So what?" Alex laughed. "Now we will have 2 daughters. I've always dreamed of having a big family, so I'm willing to have a 3rd and a 4th child. Chris, I promise I'll never hurt you or Jessica." He's made a subtle switch to you with her. "We've been through a lot in life, and now we must be happy together." "I agree," Chris replied, after a moment's silence. Emma was lying on the bed and didn't even turn her head when the door opened and someone entered the room. She didn't expect any of her family to visit her, although in the letter she had sent to her mother, after much thought, she had written that she was very ill and they might never see each other again. "Hello, sister," Chris whispered as she approached the bed. "You've changed so much that I didn't even recognize you at first." "This illness has changed me," Emma said, and tried to rise a little on the pillow, but collapsed helplessly back on the bed. "But you did come, didn't you?" said Emma. "So you've decided to forgive me." "I don't hold it against you," Chris said calmly. "What happened is what happened. It's not for me to judge you. Life has already decided everything for us." "You came alone," Emma looked hopefully at the door. "I wish I could meet my mom and apologize to her for not seeing her for so many years. Our mom couldn't make it. She's been feeling very ill lately, but she's waiting for you to come and see them herself. Daddy, when he read your letter, thought at first that you were deceiving everyone to make them feel sorry for you, and he wouldn't even let me come to see you. But Mama and I managed to persuade him." "I'm very sorry to everyone," Emma said, tears streaming from her eyes. "And now I'm paying the price. Tell me about your life. Is everything okay?" "What's there to tell?" Chris sat back in her chair. "Mom and Dad retired. Well, you know Dad, he can never stay still. He helps out in the workshop, goes fishing in the morning, goes mushrooming in the woods. My mom is sick, but she still makes a fuss about the household. My husband, children, and I often visit them, bring food and help them." "Do you have children?" Emma looked at her sister in surprise. "You said you couldn't get pregnant." When was that?" Chris laughed. "I've got 3 kids now. The oldest, Jessica, is in 8th grade. Jean is a first grader, and the youngest, Adrian, just turned 5. I don't get it, Emma frowned. Where did you get such a grown-up daughter? It doesn't matter where she came from, Chris said seriously. What matters is that she's my daughter, and I love her very much. My son could have gone to first grade too. Emma turned her head to the side. You probably don't know that Aiden and I had a baby with a heart condition, and I had to put him in boarding school. He's probably dead by now. Emma wiped away a tear. Is your son alive? Chris looked at her sister angrily. My husband Jean managed to track down his foster parents, who told me that Adrian had heart surgery and is now a perfectly healthy child, moderately mischievous and mischievous. They even sent a picture of him. He looks a lot like Aiden. Emma frowned. That's an interesting name. How can I see him? You can't, Chris shrugged. First of all, he lives in another country. And secondly, he's got real parents who spent a lot of effort and money on his recovery. Unlike you, who abandoned him to his fate. That's what you're paying for now. Emma's crying again. And not just for that. For all the evil I've done to you and my parents, and other people too. It's time to pay the bills. It's a shame to leave life so soon, but it can't be helped. Stop burying yourself before your time. Chris got angry. I haven't talked to the doctors yet, but I think you'll be fine. We'll take you to the country for fresh air, put you under the cherry tree chair. You'll listen to the birds singing. Remember how the nightingales sing here? Home and walls help. God willing, you'll get well and get back on your feet. And when the vacations come, we'll bring the children to the village, and you'll study with your nephews. Children will get anyone back on their feet. Thank you for the hope. Emma smiled weakly. I'm sorry, sister. I didn't need your Aiden back then. I just felt bad that everything was going so well for you. All I had was the wind blowing through my head. I wanted it all. You think I only ruined your family? I stole another husband away from a family with 2 little kids. His wife probably cursed me for that. And I wanted to have a family of my own and have a baby. Emma was silent for a long time, then said quietly, but it didn't work out with either of them. I thought long and hard about whether I should write you a letter, but it was so scary to die alone. Calm down, Chris stroked her younger sister's shoulder. You're not alone now. You will always have your family and friends with you. I'll find out from your doctor when you can be taken home, and we'll pick you up at the weekend and take you to your parents' village. Is that a deal? Emma nodded her head silently. Tears continued to roll down her cheeks. The doctors couldn't say anything comforting to Chris. The tumor was growing too fast, metastasizing to all her organs. And how long her sister will last, it is unknown. Maybe a month, maybe a week, maybe a couple days. And there's nothing that can be done. Chris put her hand over her mouth. There are some drugs, aren't there? You tell me, can we find the money to buy them? In your case, it's pointless to spend money, answered the gray-haired doctor. If you want, you can take your sister home. We will prescribe the necessary medication to help her with the pain. Okay, Chris lowered her head. Then we'll take her out of the hospital on Saturday. But Emma didn't live to see Saturday. Chris grieved for a long time, feeling sorry for her little sister and her failed life. Jean did his best to comfort his wife. Then one day he said, You know, everyone chooses his own fate and is responsible for this choice. But you can always turn from the wrong path if, of course, there is enough time for it. It's good that your sister had time to apologize to you and left with a light heart. You're so wise, Chris said, pressing herself against her husband. The best man in the world. Everybody's got their own road to travel. And to know where you fall, where you need to rest, stop, and on which you will find happiness.